Welcome everybody. Blessed are those that visit this channel and enjoy the content here.
Right, this is going to be the first episode of 2021, Thorin's Rotations. And my guests for this episode, on my left, is going to be the man you might know as Dexter, or as I call him, you know, just like the guy whose job it is to come and nuke Duck Lane. I went, no, just a harmless joke from the old days, if anyone's from back from then. No, obviously now he's known as Marcel Feldkamp. And he is better known for his post-playing career where he's an agent. He works with Proxy, which is his agency at the moment. It's all your agency, right? It's all yours.
Yeah, it's mine. It's my agency.
There you go. And then obviously on the right here, I've got Rich, from best known maybe from his time in H2k, obviously from the pre-franchising days. And actually was telling me he also, I'm assuming in more of like an unofficial capacity, helps out some players in the off-season, because let's face it, like players still to this day pretty clueless about how contracts work, how offers work, all that garbage, right? So you've been doing a little bit of that. Is it unofficial? Is it totally off the books? Or is it something you get paid for? How do you do it?
Yeah, so especially you know, for things I've said publicly or whatever, I want to make sure that I'm under everything's overboard with tax or whatever. It is official. I do have contracts with players in the off season, and yeah, I'm also I'm working independently. I'm not working with like a big agency or anything like that. And yeah, I'm exclusively working with players in Europe, though. I'm not really touching America right now.
Okay. So for the concept for this episode is, yeah, we're going to review a bunch of the off-season changes, the teams that are coming now. But the reason I assembled this panel of people is I thought it'd be cool if we could do both. You could do the business side, you know, speculate about that, because by the way, I find that angle of analysis appalling in esports, but understandably so. It's because guess what, having watched 10,000 VODs gives you zero extra insight into how a business deal works, or what investment a team has, or whether this was the right, you know, strategical move. Like, you can only tell about in-game, and at the same time, the people who know the business side of things and some of the journalists just have appalling knowledge of the game, unfortunately. Like, they're just plebs. So it's rare you can ever get a bunch of people where potentially we can do both sets of analyses, because that's one thing I've been trying to actually stress a lot in my work the last couple of years, people might notice on shows, is I think it's time we stop pretending like the old days where you just get, like, remember when salaries are so low, then it's just about like how good is your team and, you know, how are they going to do in the server. In my opinion, in the modern day, we have to start valuing deals based on the circumstantial context. Like, what org is it? How much money do they have? What are the expectations? Who could they have gotten? Like, if we don't do this, we're going to end up in stupid scenarios where, you know, we praise Cloud9, where, for example, this is just a pure speculation, like, in theory, someone could say financially that was a terrible deal to get perks. Meanwhile, on the other hand, there'll be some European org that picked up a rookie mid laner who never would have had the money for anyone who was an established player. So maybe that was even the right move. So the point is, I want us to have context when we discuss these things. So let's start on the business side with some of these deals, and then we'll work our way into, you know, we'll do the actual league analysis and what we think they'll be like in the game and all the rest of it. So why don't we start with the biggest move of the off season? It might even be the biggest move in League of Legends ever. I said this in my video. I know people are going to think, wait, isn't though? What about UGI to OMG? It's like, man, no one else gave a fuck about that, and no one knows even the details or can believe the thing's printed. So I think, in my opinion, Perks not only leaving G2, but going in a massive deal to Cloud9 to another region completely, which itself bucks a pretty big trend in the history of the game. And if we had to believe all the people involved, not just doing it for the money. In theory, doing it because he also thinks it can be viable. Like, there's so much on this deal we can do business-wise, game-wise. So since everyone else has done the in-game aspect, and I notice a lot of people, especially Fnatic fans, don't even seem to have a comprehension that there's a business side involved. They seem to just think because they want Perks to be in a Fnatic jersey, he has to play in Fnatic. So I'll start with you, Dexter, or Marcel. We'll call you Dexter for this one. Old habits die hard. So this is the question. Everyone heard these like huge numbers. I know there was a lot of fuckery in what was reported publicly, because they started with like a massive number, like 11 million or whatever. Then they were saying like part of it's the buyout, and then maybe you got a discount, but still, it's definitely a massive deal. What do you think about this as an actual deal? Like, on the Cloud9 side, I can tell you can see in my interview with Jack, it's not like they pretend like they think they're going to make millions off having Perks and, you know, this will be like a plus. It's not like when you signed David Beckham back in the day and you sell like a fucking billion jerseys or something. They know that this is basically a loss leader, but the premise for them, as far as I can tell, is it doesn't matter because they want to win. They just want the results now. It's essentially they're willing to trade the money for the results and the prestige. So what do you think about this as an actual deal? Like, did they overpay? Was it a good deal? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this was a pretty record-breaking deal without getting into the details of how much it actually was. But I thought that in the context of just looking at this year, we can't really look at the deal just like just isolated. We just have to take in the entire history of like the last 7 or 8 years where Cloud9 has been around, and economically wise, they've always been one of the best teams, I think, and one of the cheapest rosters. So in a way, Jack has saved the money from previous years, according to counterparts, and then was able to spend a lot of money for that one signing, right? And I thought it makes a lot of sense, because if you look at Perks, right, what he did for G2, I mean, this is a player that doesn't only bring you something in the game, he transcends, right? Like he's great in the team environment. I think whatever culture he brings to the team is also going to swap over into like the rest of the other games. So I think this is also like a pretty big signing just for the entire org, not only for like the league division itself, if he can replicate the same thing that he did on the G2 side. So I do think, it was a massive deal, obviously, but it's not the first time that Jack has tried to make like big signings on like the league side, right? I think he mentioned that he tried for caps as well.
Yes.
There's only a handful of players there where you really spend that kind of money, and I think Perks was obviously one of the few people. And for Perks side, it obviously made sense to do that, because if you look at how everything played out in Europe, I mean, you can't go to Fnatic, so what you're gonna do, right? You have to join a team where you feel that you can accomplish the most and go furthest. So I would assume that with Cloud9 now, in that context, he actually has a great chance to actually go out of groups, make a top 8 or whatever, top 4, if the team really comes together. We just have to see how. I mean, I don't really pay too much attention, or don't really care too much about the first games, how everything is going now. It's more like, okay, when it's crunch time, right? When it's playoffs, can we actually see what the team can do in like summer split when they qualify for Worlds, and then what they actually do in the group phase. So that's for me the more interesting. You don't make a signing to just win North America, right? The clear goal of this is to make a deep run into the Worlds bracket. So yeah.
What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, I think to Dexter's point, when he says there's only a couple of players you would do a move like this for, I completely agree, but I would actually shift the onus a little bit onto the style of player as well. It's not just about how good they are. And I actually think if I was in Jack's position, I would much rather do this move for Perks than a player like Caps, simply because if you're going to sign a player of this ilk for this kind of money, you need to be signing intangibles as well.
Yes.
It's not just about how good is the player. Like, we can all agree that Caps is probably at least a top 5 mid laner in the world, maybe higher. But what does he actually bring to the team outside of his incredibly high skill level, right? Whereas Perks, obviously we can never truly know just how impactful he is in his intangibles, but we for sure have more than a big enough sample size to know that it exists in a significant capacity at the very least. So I think signing someone like Perks, if you're going to make a huge money move, in the West is probably the best player you can sign for that amount of money if you want someone who's going to change the whole look of your team and the potential prospects of how far you can go on an international level, for example. Someone who's been there a million times before, someone who's a very good player, just skill-wise, so he's going to hold his own. As I agree with Marcel as well, that I don't care about week one. It's really whatever. I'd be, it'd just be a bonus if he happened to play well. I really don't care. But going forward, he's a very good mid laner. You also know he has a huge say in how the game is played, and he's also one of the main people who created part of this G2 identity of like doing things on the fly, right? Like, everyone goes into a game that, with a game plan that they worked out somewhat with their coach or their draft or whatever. But the main thing that G2 is famous for, these sort of ad hoc skirmishes that they just decide to do and think, hey, I'm pretty sure we can win this random situation that we've never pre-planned for. A lot of that was Perks. So I think it's a great signing. Economically, I think it's like one of these things where, as long as this might sound a bit weird, but as long as you know that financially it was a bad decision and you do it anyway, and you're justifying that by, the in-game decision and the bigger picture decision, I think it was actually okay. Like, I think the two are symbiotic. I don't think it's just as simple as this is bad because he paid X amount of money. Of course, financially, in a vacuum, it's a bad move, right? Because any move in League of Legends, or any single move in League of Legends that's costs upwards of however many millions, is a bad move categorically.
Yes.
But in terms of what you want to do in the long term or whatever, so far as you would ever do a move like this financially, I think it's a great move. Yes,
I think that last point as well is also key, because people have to think of it this way. And in the sense, by the way, that this is how the org owners are thinking, especially in NA. They're viewing the LCS slot as an asset that they think will over time accrue more value. Like they think the slot that they bought for 10 million will one day be worth 50 million, 100 million. Obviously, if it becomes like a massive sport, like the dream is $1 billion, you know, like an NBA franchise or something. Even if we keep it in the realistic world, that one day it could be worth 50 million. Well, if that's really what essentially your business plan, I'm saying, if that's your business plan, then part of it, if you ever want to exit with a profit, is you want to know that, right, in the meantime, so I bought in for 10 million, and then each year I'm going to spend X million, right? But you don't want at the end that to be, I spent 100 million and then it's worth 50 million, but so even if I sell, I lost 50. You want it to be like, right, I can spend millions. So to me, it's like, listen, it's fine essentially to lose the money, as long as you really believe that is the long-term goal and that's your business plan. But the key thing is, like you're saying, when you take however much you're going to spend each year, like I say, you can't just spend everything. So you want to be very selective about when you do spend the millions. And I think actually, like Dexter said, I think Cloud9's probably done the best job of anyone I've seen. If everyone knew how much, because think about it, right? They had the original 5 players for a long time, 2 full years, like 4 or 5 splits or something. Then later on, you brought in a bunch of rookies many, many times over, or you got people in certain cases. I would even speculate some of the big names they've had have had discounts. Like I doubt Sven was like the maximum amount when they bought in on him. Obviously, they got Incarnation later, Jensen basically for very little because it was so basically of all the orgs, they're probably the one that's min-maxed versus the results. Maybe the best, might even be the best in the entire West if you look at how the others have sort of splurged that much earlier. So first of all, on the business side, I think it makes sense, assuming, by the way, you also want to have some success in the meantime. You don't just want to hold position as like the 3rd best team and then get to the 50 million valuation. You want to also win some championships as well. And, you know, like you were alluding to before, bring complementary value to the other teams in your org, make yourself a championship org. These things matter. But for me, on the player side, I think you guys have nailed it. The funny thing is this, if you asked a fan who would you rather have, Caps or Perks, they're all going to say Caps, right? But in doing so, I think they would actually completely misunderstand this entire discussion we're having. Because the problem if I bring Caps in is, first of all, you've seen what he's like. He's kind of like a weird guy. Like, people might get along with him. I don't really see him as a leader figure. You know, like, basically all of his upside, as far as I can tell, is inside the server. And right now, that doesn't make you very much money. The upside of Perks could be in the server, but even if it isn't, the stuff outside of the server is crazy. Like, for me, the number one upside of having him, aside from, you know, bring prestige to your org, the actual results in the game. The number one reason is what I always like joke about, but people know I'm doing it tongue in cheek. It's not a joke. He really is basically the best general manager in fucking Europe. Like, he just recruits the players, and even if he doesn't overtly do it, they just want to play with him anyway. So as a result, like, the implied value in the future is nuts. Like, that might even get you the next superstar rookie. That could be Caps before it's Caps, or that might get you just the next big talent. They might even come for a discount to play with him. So there's even ways where it's not even just, you know, like just a pure sum right now of this moment. It could affect other things in the future. So to me, that's a big consideration. You have to take that into account. Like, I think that part's crazy. Like, people don't seem to realize there are very few players who can really do that. Like, maybe Bjergsen was one of them. There's only a handful that people really want to like go play with and would, you know, could potentially actually help the business side in that regard.
No, absolutely. I think what we also have to take into consideration, this is not like a one-year signing, right? So even if this year doesn't go well, Sven is becoming resident at one point throughout the year probably as well. So what Perks can do is he can just recruit the next superstar out of Europe, right? Because now more European players have actually an incentive to go play because Perks is there, right? That's the whole appeal to it, that based on that decision alone, you can probably either make an upgrade in the top lane or maybe jungle. I don't know. The support seems fine, but if you really want to go that route and look at like the next 1 or 2 years ahead, there's obviously like a lot of upside to making such a signing. And then if you look at Jack, I mean, he just didn't invest the money and just lost it. Someone like Perks, even if it doesn't work out in 2 years, right, you can always sell him and the value is still, he can recoup a lot of that money back, which is also something that not a lot of people understand, right? Just based on what he has accomplished so far, makes him so incredibly valuable that, if he decides to sell that contract maybe in 2 years or in 3 years or however, then he's probably recouping some of the millions back, right? That's what I would at least assume, because Luka is still very, very young. He's like 22, he just turned 22. So he probably has another 6, 7, 8 years ahead of him where he can perform at a very, very high level. So yeah, if you look at long term, I think it still makes a lot of sense despite of how expensive this whole thing was.
He's someone I think as well that people would be willing to give the benefit of the doubt to if he were to slump at some point. Yes. I think especially because of the intangibles. And again, with someone like Caps, you know, sometimes you might think that the level of success he's going to have is directly linked to, for example, how motivated is this guy to spam solo queue all the time. And Caps is someone who plays a lot of solo queue as an example. Now, I'm not saying that's Caps' secret sauce to why he's a good player, but because you're looking at it through such a much more singular lens of why this guy is good and in what areas he's good. With Perks, he brings so much more to the table that even if he were to slump a little bit, and especially if it's, you know, him going back the other way to Europe at some point, then I think people would also say, hey, maybe if we put him back in the environment where he was most comfortable and won all those championships, you know, we're going to get the best out of Perks again, or at least something close to, right? You don't want to spend loads of money on getting 75, 80% of what Caps once was, because the margins are very thin when it comes to in-server stuff, right? But if, you know, maybe you do believe he's slumped, but you think, hey, I'm still going to get 80% of the totality of what Perks brings, that's worth a lot of money, right? So I think Cloud9 has kind of like a mini inbuilt insurance policy almost, just in terms of how much he does actually bring to the table outside of just being really good at mid lane.
The one thing I want to also ask, though, is the part that does it sort of confuse me in a sense is that when they made this lineup, that they have this rookie in the top lane in Fudge. Like, this is no comment on him as a player. I haven't seen him play in the LCS yet. No one has. So what I'll say is this, and I don't count that fucking lock-in tournament, obviously, right? What I would say is this. The reason why on the one hand it makes sense, but it doesn't, listen, it makes a lot of sense that if you've just absolutely broken the piggy bank wide open to sign the superstar player, let's try and save some money with just an all-right contract for the other guy, because there's no way that was like a comparable... Like, put it this way, I'm sure Alfari would have cost a lot more than whatever Fudge costs. But at the same time, if I'm doing the approach of like, look, I'm also trying to, like, you know, let's say he really does believe he's trying to win worlds if it's Jack, well then that's why the rookie part to me is a big gamble, because I've said this before, there can be rookies that are really good, like they can come in and be LCS quality, but the odds that they go international the first year and can deliver, I don't know if that's ever happened in Europe, mate. Like that would be a long time ago you'd be looking for a player like that. Like basically in the modern day, you know, there's a learning curve. It takes you time. Even if you are really good, you know, usually not a polished product after 1 year. So in my opinion, that's the only sort of like leak in the roster, like in the server for me. So I kind of feel like, look, if you were going to go that way anyway, just shell out a little bit more and get a really sick top lane, and then we're cooking with gas. Now people will be pretty hyped about this lineup. Whereas I'm not even saying the Fudge guy won't be good. I'm just saying what are the odds that he's going to be as good as an Alfari or someone of that ilk, you know?
Yeah, but I don't think that is a money decision. It's more like they had 2 import slots, right? And like I said, with Sven
true.
With Sven becoming a resident next year, potentially, I don't know when it actually is going to be, there's probably going to be European mid laners that are going to look at it and say, hey, can I join G2? Okay, no, I can't join G2. Where do I go next, right? And then C9 suddenly becomes a very desirable destination, I think, in the event that he doesn't work out. But from what I understood is that the reason why they actually promoted him was because he had such phenomenal...
They claim he's some prodigy. Yeah.
And C9 is the best organization, I think, when it comes to player development in North America, like hands down. So I would put the trust in them to like make the decision to bring up players from the academy team into the main roster, and would say that it's probably like a very conscious decision, because they could have just kept Licorice, right? I don't think anything would have spoken against it. They probably felt that he was a better pick based on what they have planned for this team. And that was probably the reason why they were like, okay, maybe we can make some money with Licorice. Unfortunately, the economics behind everything didn't really work out, because the NBA is pretty broke right now. So, and a lot of deals fell through there. But I think, yeah, I mean, they would have probably thought, okay, if we sell Licorice for like whatever kind of money, we can promote our player for like very, very little money, and we make a bit of money back on that front, because they spent, like, they broke the bank for Perks. So just some more things to think about.
Actually, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think Licorice is actually just a really good example of how the business side in North America works in general, where, you know, Licorice is a good player, right? But he's not special. Like, if I'm being honest, he's not a special top laner, but because he has NA residency, this guy holds such higher value than he should. And I think Cloud9 has always done a really good job of, like, if you do have, especially if you do have good the player development that they have, of bringing in these resident players, sort of propping them up and then selling them for way over what market value should be, because obviously how the import system works, you know, these guys end up going for way more than in actuality they would be worth, right? Like, even with Alfari going over to North America now, and with top lane, to be honest, not being like the strongest position in Europe right now, right? Like, it's kind of top heavy. Licorice would still be like halfway down if he played in the EU, right? He's not like a top 4 top laner if you put him in the EU right now. So this guy's like way overpriced. So I think Cloud9's always made very good decisions about when to move people, right? And it's always better, or almost always better, unless you're literally on the cusp of, absolute greatness, of moving someone just slightly too early than it is moving them just too late, right? And they did that with Svenskeren as well. That's not even to speak negatively about Svenskeren as a diminishing skill set, but it was a great time to move him on because they had Blabber emerging, and because of the value you can get for these players who are either residents or approaching residency, which would be Svenskeren's case, right? So I think he's sort of juggled the economics very well there.
Yes, I would absolutely agree. I think most of the moves have been great. I mean, the only one that was even vaguely questionable for me was letting Jensen go, and quite frankly, 2 years later, you have perks. So I don't even know I can hate on that. Like, it's sort of, that's actually how you know, by the way, you're a shrewd businessman. Another factor that people who are fans don't think about is, let's say I build a roster like this. Like, let's say, just for the sake of the premise, that Jack himself knows it's a massive gamble to bring Fodge in, right? Well, okay, let's say I've got 4/5 of the roster I think is straight fire, and I'm going to try this guy out. If it doesn't work, I can always just buy another player for next year, assuming they're all under contract. It's not like the roster has to end there. I have to do a new one. So I think people also misunderstand that. Like, you can make tweaks as well. You can test stuff out. Right, what about this then? A more fun one to talk about, in my opinion, is the TSM roster. Because this one obviously was, you could tell on their end, it was a nightmare during the off-season. Like, it was some sort of mad shit where they were trying to, like, spin a bunch of plates all at once. And bizarrely, at the end, they got most of the plates, but then there was this weird scenario where it's actually very, very bizarre, because normally, I actually think Reginald's done some pretty good moves over the years. I actually think, like, signings isn't one of his worst areas. He's had some that haven't worked out, certainly. But, he's signed a lot of good players over the last few years, and as a result, they've had some decent results. But one part I found very bizarre about this was that it basically was heavily implied behind the scenes that they did want Doublelift initially, but then they themselves, as an org, almost got butthurt that he said no and that he was going to leave. So then they went and got the player he demanded and then said, you can't play. Like, is this like a 14-year-old girl's birthday party? Like, what? I can't believe that's how you run an org. Like, if that's even vaguely plausible, that is bizarre to me. And it has to be plausible, because either they didn't want Doublelift, in which case, what is even all that story? Or they did, and this is what happened. So I find it very... What do you think on this move, Rich?
So I do believe there is truth to this story. I don't think it's quite as ridiculous as that, but it's close enough to still be ridiculous. So my understanding is that basically it was a timing issue where they were in contact with Sword Art. I don't think it was like directly off Doublelift's request. Like, the only reason we're talking to this guy is because of Doublelift, but they were talking to Sword Art. Doublelift made it very clear that this was the guy that he wanted, and then it reached the point where they thought the deal wasn't going to happen with Sword Art. And then Doublelift, I don't know if this was his own timeline or TSM's timeline, saying, like, you need to make a decision if you're signing on or whatever. But basically, he was heavily given the impression that not only would he not get to play with Sword Art, but that he was going to have to play with a different support player who he was not a fan of at all. So Doublelift was like, okay, clock's running out. Again, I don't know if this was his own timeline or the org's timeline. I'm retiring, basically. And then almost immediately after, they made progress with Sword Art and ended up signing Sword Art. But then at that point, they'd already made commitments to the other AD carry option. That's my understanding of how the story went. So as a childish an organization as I believe TSM are, I don't think he was signed out of spite. I think that they signed Sword Art because that was the player that they did want.
By the way, just as an aside, like, listen, this doesn't mean it's a fact. It was just a statement by one of the people involved. So certainly you should consider there'll be a level of bias. Doublelift himself, when he did his video where he explains what's happening, which if you've ever watched them, by the way, look like someone just being interrogated who has no clue what the questions are before. Because it's so obvious that, listen, I've interviewed this guy many times. I can tell when someone's actually, like, saying what they've thought about, and it's something like repeated, or if they're just making it up off the top of their head. Like, he just wings together excuses. His excuse was hilarious, Rich, because it makes it go right back into the territory of parody, where when he described the pallet guy, the one you're referring to, the other support, the Vietnamese support who was part of Gigabyte Marines back in the day, basically he said something along the lines of, like, I actually think he's really good. In fact, I'm the one who suggested him, but I didn't want to play with him because he doesn't have very good English. It's like, mate, you're all over the place. Fucking hell, mate. Like seriously, you're like an anti-agent to your own career. What is this? Like, I don't know. What do you think on this whole thing, Dexter? Have you got any thoughts on this, the initial move?
On the TSM move, I mean, yeah, I think if you spend that kind of money for like any player, it's always like a very emotional decision, right? It's like a normal sales process. So I feel that while it was, I don't know what was going on internally, I do feel that it was like a move that was also pressured by Steve and Jack making fantastic move themselves, right? So I don't think that Reginald is just someone that could have signed someone on maybe someone lesser skilled and just call it a day. I do think that after you sign someone like Alfari to Team Liquid and re-sign Jensen and Perkz going to C9, when you know that kind of stuff, you kind of have to...
You got to match them.
Yeah, you have to match them, and you also have to kind of justify to your fan base that, hey, how can it be that these two teams make these great moves and we are going empty-handed? So I do feel that there was a lot of pressure and emotions involved in making that decision to actually pull the trigger for like $6 million over 2 years.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, ideally, I think, like he said in this interview, that if we don't make it past, I don't know, like top 4 or top 2 in Worlds, then it was a failure. So I think whatever happens in the split and during the split, like I have the same standards like I put C9 to, that if they actually make it to Worlds and they go far, then it was probably worth it in the end. But if they come short and don't make it out of groups again, I don't really know how if they're gonna continue with him in the next year. I don't know how the contract is structured and how that all went out, but initially, I would say that it's probably, I mean, if you spend that kind of money, and to me, what was more logical was that if you sign PoE, why don't you just sign Igna as well? You know, it's like a proven duo.
Yeah.
They have done fantastic work. You've seen that when Igna came in with FlyQuest, he elevated their team to like another level. He has already done very well against T1 with PoE in the past. So to me, it indicates that either, I don't know why they didn't go with Igna, but for me it was the logical thing that if I sign PoE, okay, I need to upgrade my support, I might as well just take Igna here. So for me, just taking that into consideration, that it was more like an emotional move and more than anything else, and just from the pressure from the other two sides, I would assume that this was how it really went down. And yeah, and then the double lift thing, yeah, no idea. Again, I would have to speculate how the internal timeline was, why that happened to be like that, and yeah, and now they ended up with Lost, who we'll see how he performs. Still like a rookie, right? And needs like a lot of work probably. So maybe it's a waste to put some support level with that kind of play tech and then pair him with a rookie. You would expect that you make that kind of roster to really put like an elite bot lane that can compete against anyone in the worlds, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we don't have enough data.
Agree with that.
We don't have enough data to really justify. Maybe they're popping off. Maybe they're actually the best bot lane by the time World comes around. But until then, I don't really think that we can make a fair assessment of if it's going to be worth it or not. Right? We have to see how Worlds plays out.
To be honest, I kind of disagree with that to an extent. Obviously, like I agree with the fact that we can't know. Right? Of course. I mean. Yeah. Hypothetically, they could win Worlds, right? And it's like, oh, I see, it was worth it. But I think this is a situation we can actually look without even really needing any kind of hindsight. I think this is a ridiculously stupid move. And I think putting that much investment into a player whose performance is going to be solely linked to someone else on the team is absolutely absurd, especially when that player is a rookie. I don't know much about Lost. I would be lying if I pretended that I'd been following this guy's career closely or whatever. But I think spending $6 million over 2 years on a player who a huge chunk of his game is predicated, for example, on how well you can do in lane, and not just in a literal laning capacity, but also how well does the partnership enable to roam and move as he would like to make plays around the map while his AD carry can take care of himself. All these things are directly linked to the performance of Lost as well. And I think spending that amount of money on a completely untested partnership is absolutely ludicrous. If you're going to spend that kind of money, you should spend it on someone like a Perkz, where you're a guy who's playing mid lane, a lane which is like you take care of yourself. How you move and how you roam is largely predicated on your own decision making and out of your own agency, right? Obviously, jungle and stuff it plays a role, but when you have an ADC support relationship and you're spending $6 million on half of that relationship, to me that makes absolutely no sense at all, especially when it's completely untested. I think it's a ludicrous allocation of funds.
It is, but at the same time, I think if you would have to look at what impact Core JJ had, right? Would you, with that knowledge, based on what he has done over like the last years, would you have maybe spent the same money for someone like Core JJ? Because it obviously had a very great impact, right? He was the MVP, I think, of the league. He was having a phenomenal performance. So,
but you were pairing him with superstar AD carry,
yes.
So it's completely different. In that sense, you're paying, let's say it's the same amount of money. You're paying the $6 million to complete bot lane Exodia, right?
Yes,
Whereas this time you're paying 6 million to who the fuck knows, roll a dice, basically.
Yeah, no,
go on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying. I'm just saying that I think I believe it was a highly emotional decision. That's what I think was the whole deal about it. And I would have never, if I would have been the GM of that team, I would have never ever spent that kind of money, because I couldn't have justified it in my world. If I would have been a GM, even if it wasn't my money and it was VC money, I don't think I could have justified making that move work in any way. So, yeah.
See, this is the thing. To me, it all ties in. Like, obviously, we can talk about the other roster moves as well, but I think it all ties together in the similar sentiment. Like, obviously, I don't know if they actually did do the double lift thing off emotion or not. It just looks a little bit dodgy, because in my opinion, fuck off if you say Lost is better than double lift. He obviously isn't, you idiot. Like, I've watched both of them play. Like, Lost looked like a player who had some potential. He looked all right when I watched him play. He's the sort of player who should be on Golden Guardians. Let's be reasonable. Like, he's not, like, what are the odds? Like, put it this way, if people are prodigies, they don't just lay dormant for the first 2 or 3 years. That's the definition of a prodigy. You're just a fucking banger out the gate. Like, so if not, then you have to believe you can develop him, which I'm doing air quotes for that because it's about the most sinister fucking term in esports. Usually it just means I just gambled on this guy and I'm just praying he's good. Like, you don't develop him. Who's going to fucking teach him? Like, it's Sword Art going to teach him, is he? Because, by the way, think about it logically. Sword Art already looked fucking washed at Worlds as it was, and he was playing with someone who, by all accounts, is a fucking prodigy in China. So if anything, you're just going to see a worse bot lane than what they had in that team, in the Sunning team. So to me, yeah, I think this move is crazy, but I think it all ties into the bigger picture, which is, in my opinion, I think Dexter's nailed it. First of all, if you're TSM and you're going to go around for the last 3 years totally disingenuously, and I would say just outright dishonestly, pretending that cause your company apparently makes a profit, trying to conflate that with your League of Legends division making a profit, which they always do to their fans. If you're going to do that, well, okay, I'll hold you at your word. You better fucking spend some of the money then. You better not be min-maxing after that. Like, at least the other people will admit they lose money, of course. So if you're going to do that, right, as Dexter says, if Team Liquid again re-ups with massive signings, clearly some of the best players in the West, if even Cloud9, the ones that normally are the fucking penny pinchers, if they break the bank and get perks, guys, we've got to have some big signings. So in my opinion, this looks like they fucked up the off-season, and as a result, the only way they could get the big names that were sort of vaguely within reason to want to join TSM was this bunch of people. So they were like, right, Hooney, well, he's always a big name, but something like that. Get Sword Art, wasn't he in the Files of Worlds? And then I can only imagine some absolute brainlet level of but PoE was in the LCS final against us before. Listen, I think PoE's a good player. Point is, though, he's replacing Bjergsen for fuck's sake. To me, this just looks so slapdash as a roster. I don't even hate all the players. You could sign any player in isolation to this team. I could maybe find a way to mentally make it work. But collectively, I think this is a train wreck. I'm amazed people are kind of hyped on this. I know TSM fans can sort of convince themselves of anything, but this one really is pushing the boat out to me. Especially if you then know they also spent fucking tons of money on it.
It's the Football Manager lineup.
Yes.
Right? And I think this is one of those situations as well, where, as I said, I kind of see it similar to not just the Sword Art situation specifically, but even in hindsight, if it somehow all clicks and TSM go on a run and they're, they're not doing shit in Worlds, let's be real, but if they make NA finals or something, people will look back and say, yeah, see, these were good moves. I think that there is still a large chunk of synergy between players and also players as people that you can never really predict. And if it does happen, I think it will actually purely be luck, to be honest. I think when I look at these names, I don't see any correlation or I can't connect the dots as to why these combination of players they thought would be a really good idea. And again, it comes back to this whole idea of at the start of the season, you have your short list of players for each position, but also you're connecting dots up and down in those positions of, if I get this guy for top lane, let's say, then my number 2 jungler maybe becomes my number 1 jungle option,
yes,
right? Because either they have history together or I know their play styles will mesh or whatever. And Dexter made a point about, why don't you bring in Ignar here? Even if Ignar wasn't technically the best option, there is at least several logical threads that connect him making sense on this team, right? So I don't know. I think this is a poorly constructed roster, and I don't see it working. And I also kind of see, in some ways, the Bjergsen being a coach as an extension of that. And this may be slightly unfair because I don't know Bjergsen super well, and for all I know, maybe he could end up being a great coach. But I also think this is just a super easy, convenient thing where it's like, I look at the roster, and if I apply what I believe was the same mindset to the roster, it's not surprising to me that Bjergsen would be coach. It's like, this guy was a really good mid laner for ages. Most people think he was kind of smart about the game as well. So if he's smart about the game, he should be able to teach other people to be smart about the game. Boom, he's coach because he says he wants to retire. Great. This is like a really convenient career path for him. Again, I would preface that by saying that's more of a guess than anything else, you know? So for all I know, he could be a great option, but I lose faith in the coach position purely based off what I see from how the roster was put together. And also, presumably, Bjergsen had a say in the roster, right? So my first impressions of Bjergsen as a coach, if he did indeed have a say in the roster, are not good.
Yeah, one thing I would say about that is, again, it's kind of like you said before. Like, I agree. It doesn't matter even if TSM end up being awesome at the end. They didn't fucking know that. They don't have a crystal ball. So just because you lock into it doesn't mean it was the right move. Like, we're judging the moves in isolation now at the beginning of this. We're asking now, is it a good move or not? Like, otherwise you end up in mad scenarios where, like, by the logic before, like, well, you should have let Jensen go because it meant you get perks in there. Like, they didn't know that. They just thought I'd get rid of him and get fucking Nisky. Like, those are two separate decisions, boys. You can't tie those together. So what I would say is this. One thing we can absolutely inarguably say right now, Rich, is Bjergsen has zero experience coaching. He has never coached ever. And you're going to put him on a team where you're...
Not true. I'm pretty sure he was telling Loco to shut up every 2 minutes so he could have his say.
Okay,
in that,
fair enough.
Scenario.
Oh no, listen, he's ruined a lot of coaches. You know, probably has tried to take over without. And by the way, the most genius way to coach. By the way, Bjergsen, you're not very smart, are you? The best way to coach is just be the leader of the team. Literally short circuit every coach you don't like, but then just leave them to carry the can when it doesn't work out. That's fucking genius, man. It's called covering your arse. Like, now you just straight up are the one that's to blame if it doesn't work out. So, but the thing I find crazy about this angle as well is, like, yeah, as I say, he's never done it before. So what are the odds that from minute one he's just amazing? Because the reason the player angle doesn't make any sense is even the really great coaches who were players, it's like I said about rookies who were players in general, they take time to warm up. Like even Mithy, mate, if anyone should have been a lock to be a god tier coach, it is Mithy, because he is someone who legitimately has coached people on his teams, led his teams, everything. And even he, if you go watch my reflections with him, will sort of admit, like, I had a massive amount of flaws, like I didn't really know what the role was. I would find myself not even understanding the relationship, like, am I supposed to be friends with these guys? Like, what am I supposed to tell? Like, essentially, even he understood, because he's actually, you know, a pretty honest guy. Like, yeah, it's a new game. It's a new craft. You have to level up. This entire roster's an absolute clusterfuck, I think. Like, I know people are kind of hyped because they're like, oh, but what if this, that, and the other? It's like, put it this way, right? Inexperienced coach, and even worse, by the way, probably the most unfireable coach right now. Then, secondly, you've got a lineup of players where I don't think, never mind being the best, not only are none of these players going to be the best at their role, I don't even know if half of them end up being top 3 at their role. So bearing in mind, it's TSM for fuck's sake. I made this point before when I said about how I don't want to hear that Bjergsen's a sick coach and knows all shot calling and stuff. Mate, all they did in his rosters, where possible, was ram talent, just individual talent, into the different spots. And they still never had any fucking macro, like, ever, basically. They were the ones who played, like, that's the joke of why Reginald should never be in those fucking rooms on those documentaries. Motherfucker, I watched your whole career. You were the moron who thought win lane, win the game was a thing, like, to now. You think it's a thing now in, like, 2021? Like, if that was true, like, how could RNG ever lose to fucking G2 or something? Like, it could never happen, could it, you idiot? So, I think that it's just such a weird roster, because I don't really know how to get hyped about it. Like, I haven't got an in. Even if I like a player like PoE, like, where's my in here? Like, how, like, listen, PoE isn't like a fucking 1v9 player. He's not going to hard carry the game, is he? Like, to some degree, you need the team to be good, and then it enables him to carry. Like, I don't see where you get hyped on this one, and I'll just say this right now. I'm probably going to do a whole separate video on this because it deserves its own, like, 20-minute rant with all straight fire analogies. What the fuck is the obsession with the LCS orgs in all having to have Huni at some point in history? Have I missed something? That was fucking 6 years ago! What is this? Dude, people are acting like he's like prime Michael Jordan, like, we got to get him. Oh my god, Huni's available. Yeah, look, why do you think he's available every year, you dumb fuck? What? Because no one wants him anymore. It's like, Huni's like some fucking super hot girl at the bar who's got a terrible personality. You've already slept with her, you idiot. After you've done that, you have to experience a personality. Yeah, the next guy's going to get tricked. He hasn't slept with her yet, has he? Like, fucking hell, the Huni equation's killing me.
This is like a reality TV roster, though. Like,
it is, isn't it?
This is where the hype is to be had, though. The hype is to be had on the potential train wreck, and also I think this roster is going to be like really fun to watch. Like, I get your point completely, where it's like, from a winning perspective, would I be hyped on this roster? Hell no. This roster won't do anything on any level, if I had to guess, including NA. But you've got Huni, who's going to perpetually coin flip top lane, which is going to be fun to watch, I guess. You've got Power of Evil, who is a good player capable of making like big plays, putting teams on his back for games, some games, right? And then you've got this horrible bot lane amalgam of a once great player who, does he speak English? I don't know, maybe.
A little bit, yeah.
Playing with this rookie ADC who no one really has any kind of read on. And it's all being coached by the biggest legend, I guess, in their franchise's history, but who has no coaching experience whatsoever. And to me, honestly, comes across generally as a fairly reserved, sort of timid guy who I can't imagine actually exerting any kind of authority on this, what will be a very chaotic roster if I had to guess. So to me, this is like content gold. To me, this is like, hey, Reggie's fueling his main business, right? Which is content. So there you go. So,
there you go. You've got the angle. As if I missed this one, Rich, after I've always told people my favourite TV show is TSM Legends. Yeah. So I forgot the dynamic that works, which is the worse the rosters do and the better the episodes are, aren't they? Like, obviously everyone wants to watch when they go out of Worlds or something. Like, you're right, that's the angle. I've got to get in on that. I was thinking it was a real game and we were trying to win Worlds or some boys.
This is actually, they've actually checkmated you, though. They've actually checkmated you. You were like, oh, can they please stop talking about how, you know, the League of Legends division makes money? This is where they're going to make their money, off the back end of a successful MTV series or something that they're going to put on air. This is going to be, I mean, I'm actually hyped to watch this team, but not for any of the reasons why I should be. I think it's going to be the best kind of clusterfuck.
What do you think, Dexter? Have you got some, is there any rays of sunlight that you come through in your window?
I mean, yeah, I think they have to compete against Team Liquid and C9, who are obviously on paper much better rosters. So for me, it would be like not a miracle, but it would be very hard to overcome these two teams. And if they can't even overcome these two teams, how is it possible for them to do like really well on an international scale? So for me, we have to see. There's like parts about it with PoE, right, that can shine. But what is the next step for me? Like, I understand, like, if this fails, like, what is the solution, right? How do you fix this thing? Because next year, how do you move forward if you don't accomplish the goal, right? Are you gonna like who are the players that you can get, right? I don't know. Like, for me, we have to see. I'm not really sure that I would put them in the top 2 right now, at least. And they have to compete for the top 5 probably with EG and the 100 Thieves. So let's see how they do against EG and 100 Thieves. And the rest, the 5 other teams, I don't really think that that can compete in that same bracket. I think I would say, at least if I would put my personal ranking on this.
Just a really quick point about the sort of hidden cost of a team that fans, for example, never think about as well, is one of the other reasons why this roster is so hot garbage is that in all likelihood, you will have to make changes at the end of the year, right?
Yes.
Because this is not all going to go swimmingly well. And it's not just about, okay, this guy's on whatever, 500K, and we're replacing him with 500K, so that's net even, right? That's not how it works. Most of these players are signed to multi-year deals. Every time you make a change, it's actually super expensive. Like, there are these hidden costs of, you know, like mandatory severance packages that all employees in the California area are entitled to of X months, right? Like, it's not just as simple as, and just loads of small, like, ad hoc admin things that people don't even think about relocating people, plane flights, gear, all these hidden costs. It's super expensive every time you change a player, right? And they're most likely going to have to change multiple players. So you can look at a deal like Perks, for example, where there's huge upfront cost. And no matter how you look at the Perks deal, it's an expensive deal. But if the situation does go swimmingly, they'll have no additional costs attached to that, right? Unless they renegotiate a contract or something like that. And again, if he's to leave, it will almost certainly be as a sale, as a buyout, right? Whereas with a bunch of these players, you know, if Spicker has a bad season, like, no one's paying.
Not going to be worth anything.
Exactly. Same with Lost. Same with Huni, you would hope. I mean, maybe with Huni, someone.
There's probably one team left that hasn't had him yet. I know.
Yeah, but generally speaking, in theory, and Sword Art as well. Sword Art's, like, you're already saying he wasn't looking as, you know, at his peak the last time we saw him internationally. If he's then exposed on a North American level, I mean, this guy has no value if that happens. Like, no value. So none of these players, apart from Power of Evil, actually have a realistic sell-on value, if we're honest.
If people don't know, especially Sword Art, that's actually probably the worst soft asset you've just acquired, because as far as I was told from people who are like my LPL connections, they basically said, like, that was one of the only teams in the LPL he would even be playing for. Like the other teams, there's so much talent in the LPL, you know, they'll try out like the rookies, 18 he's like getting on in age. I think he's like 23, 24 something now. So basically in the LPL, that's considered like what would for us be like 30, like you're ancient at that point in time. You better be like amazing. And people forget, Suning at the end of the year was second at Worlds. They started the year as like no one even knew if they'd be a contender. They would be like barely a playoff team. So I don't think people realise that like that's, if anything, you have absolutely bought high when his like level of performance is at its lowest. It's actually by definition one of the worst moves I think I've ever seen in League of Legends. Just on this scale though, like it's actually crazy. And I'd also throw in as well, like this is the part that doesn't make any sense to me about doing this move, is when you sign a team like this, I don't even know, aside from that content angle, what you really believe is the best case scenario. Because as you say, I think you're right. These are a bunch of gamblers. Almost every player is a gambler. I think Peoria is the only one who isn't really a gambler. And even then, I think if you put the wrong team around him, he could just look quite mediocre, you know. I can't really see like what they think is going to work about this. That's the part I have a very hard time with.
I guess it's like it's theoretically a talent stack, but there's actually not even as much talent in there as they think there is. Like Huni right now, I would not say is on any level really, you know, super talented if you're gauging him against peers in the league. I think Sword Art, it's never like, Sword Art was never like Mad Life, right? Anyway, he was never like some super insane mechanical god. A lot of his value was predicated on thoughts people had about his communication and his leadership skills and stuff like this. So, you know, if his either if his skills are diminished or if he's not able to communicate as he did in previous teams because of the language barrier, or maybe the meta's just moved away from where he was strong or whatever, you know, there's a huge possible loss of value there. Power of Evil is a talented player. That's the one guy I look at on this team and say the talent level is there. This guy is talented versus his peers, but it's not like he's top one, right?
Yes,
he's not even
exactly.
top two, I would say.
Yeah.
So, you know, and then Lost, who the hell knows? So this looks like a Redditor did a talent stack, but didn't actually really understand what he was looking at, or just had outdated information. So and then, you know, they're not gonna win. This team is not gonna win on beautifully maneuvered, you know, season 4 Korean macro, right? That's not gonna happen.
Yes.
So how do you win? Like, how do you win with this team? Basically, the way I see it is Power of Evil has to monster hard carry, and I guess Sword Art just is the exact player they hope he will be. That's the only path to victory I can see, and I think that's so unlikely.
Right, here's the banter. This is how this team was made. I've reverse engineered it, boys. You know when they do those fun challenges in sports where it's like, right, build a team out of these players, you have $20, and you know, like the $10 players like Ronaldo, you know, like the fucking, you know, you go like that. Well, obviously the joke is, like most of them, you can see how it broke down there. Like obviously Spicker and fucking Lost, they saved, those are the $1, $2 ones. But the point is, they lost automatically this game because whoever the fuck put Sword Art in the $10 one, like they chose the worst of the $10 players. So they've, by even that game, they've lost. They fucked it up, boys. Man alive. I can't even believe this is real.
This is pretty interesting.
Oh, and I'll say one other thing as well. Listen, if you're going to, as Reginald has, like one thing people always ignore for some reason about TSM, it's bizarre to me. Maybe it's because Americans still have that denial that like they should ever import players, because you know that's why they keep that cycle going of like, why aren't we developing players? And then they all just cheer for the team that has all the fucking European imports and like a Korean top laner that wins. I love this team. And like, why is the other team bad? Like, there's a reason Golden Guardians isn't the most popular team in the league. I'll say this, right? Reginald was the only one who, in my opinion, in this sense is a moron, where he had Bjergsen grandfathered in as a fucking resident, and he didn't use that to abuse his team to just stack extra non-stop 3 imports the whole time, right? And also, most notably, he never brought in Koreans. He never allowed, like, Asian elite players to join TSM because I know his logic was that, you know, they won't be able to communicate as well, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I don't think he looked at the downside, which is your other fucking team can barely communicate or do anything. But the idea that you're going to go, you know what? No to Chovy. No to Uziak. Like, whoever it is that could have been, you know, like the biggest signings ever. Right. Now's the time I'm going to pull the trigger. Sword Art in 2021. Like, that's just so whack. Like, if I was a fan of TSM, I know, like, we've tried to speculate that they're trying to do this to please fans, like, we've got big names. It's like, yeah, but they're just illusions, aren't they? You've just got, like, cardboard cutouts. Like, I want a real player. Like, if I'm a TSM fan, especially now Bjergsen's gone, Give me a fucking banger player. Even if it's not someone that's like the best. Why aren't we get ones getting upset? That would be the question I'd be asking if I'm a TSM fan or something. Like, why isn't he in our team? Like, someone where there's all this upside, and there could be a superstar player. So, I don't know.
I think so much as well of like Cloud9 and at certain points Team Liquid or whatever success when they've had success has been off the back of Impact being incredibly experienced and reliable, and obviously a lot of that he didn't get from North America, right?
Yep.
And he's a player who's always been able to, even you start downing him, think, okay, maybe this is Impact's down year, really not looking that good, and then randomly at like the most important moment he becomes super relevant again, and then it forces the opposition into completely redoing their game plan like mid-series sometimes, right? Because like, fuck, Impact can still play the game, right? If TSM at any point had like even just an Impact or a Someday or something, right, it would have completely changed the dynamic of that roster. But top lane in Korea as well, like people can say, if you're importing, and I've never been someone who's been like an import first guy, right? Sure. To me, it's usually, obviously, if there are better domestic options, you'd rather have them, right? For a plethora of reasons. But when you look to import and people say, so much of the value is lost in the communication, blah, blah, blah. Top lane really is an area where that doesn't suffer nearly as much. They kind of live on an island for huge chunks of the game in various different metas. And also, top lane is an area where regardless of how you balance, like, which region is the best, blah, blah, blah. Historically, Korea has had by far the best top laners. It's not like, Korean mids, but then again, EU mids, right? Like, that's a fun conversation. But no, Korean top laners, by far the best. And again, because the communication thing is slightly mitigated because of the position that they play, why on earth TSM never looked to get themselves an Impact or a Someday or whatever during their runs in the previous years, I'll never know, because I actually think that could have been a singular move that actually would put them over the top internationally, not to win worlds, but to get out of fucking groups at least. Like, I think that was definitely achievable, but I think they prioritized quite strangely. And I think the idea of going for Korean support where, communication is such a huge part of the game, and a player whose entire performance is directly related to how his ADC performs is just nonsense, almost on an objective level, just because of the tick boxes you have to go through to make the deal worth it. It just makes no sense to me at all.
And I also think, just as an aside, if the true strength of Sword Art, like the narrative of his career, is he's this like great shot caller leader, you're already limited. It doesn't matter how good he can speak basic fluent English, you're limiting that. Like, it's not as good as if he's speaking his native language. When you say that though, Rich, here's the thing, just to trigger TSM fans, go back to any of your favourite TSM lineups. So probably, double if Bjergsen won. Just imagine the same team. Remember, that team could have had another import. In top lane, we've just got Someday or Impact, who, by the way, played in the same fucking league at the same time. Like, that already is a team where it looks like, wow, that team probably would get out of groups. So, that could have actually achieved its potential, maybe. It's actually kind of sad when you think back in that sense. Right, let's switch to another team then. Right, I'm not going to do all the NA ones, because I actually, quite frankly, I know that there's a lot of like European imports, but I think a lot of these rosters are like mad overrated. I don't know how people get hyped every year, but I am interested in the Team Liquid one, because as usual, I have to say, you know what? I know people have different reasons to dislike people or whatever, but I actually think as a GM, Steve Arhanset, true, he is just playing with like the fucking money printer, like that gif of him or whatever. He does just have like, the chance to buy everyone for the most. But aside from the fact that the deals might not be the best in terms of the amount, he hasn't put many feet wrong in terms of some of the deals he's done the last few years. Like, when he signs the big players, they tend to work out. Like, not just domestic, they tend to be pretty good teams. So, Dexter, you start on this one. What do you think of the new Team Liquid lineup?
I think it might even be better than Cloud9 this year, just because I think what they've put together is great. And yeah, Steve is known to have spent money, but if you look at it, he's not being put in a position right now where he has to spend $3 million for new support, right? Whenever I talk to people and I tell them, well, imagine if Team Liquid or TSM right now, they dropped to like 6th place suddenly. Now the cost of getting back to that first place is significantly higher than having spent a bit more money in the previous years, right? If we assume that the industry moves forward at the pace it does right now, what does it matter if you spend $1 million, like let's say like an arbitrary number, $1 million more right now, when you can keep the roster stacked and at the first place, right? I think Steve has made very great moves. I think it's probably the best roster he has put together in years. And when I talk to him, he feels the same way. So, yeah, if you have Afari now, you have Jensen who's being a resident. Core JJ is probably going to be a resident next year. So in the event that the AD carry or jungle doesn't work out, you can just upgrade it, right? And you have a couple of high-profile players in Europe again on the AD or jungle role. Someone like Selfmade comes to my mind. He is off contract next year, right? You can upgrade. That's the thing that Steve has put himself in a position now. He has the two most important carries, right? The solo laners. Those are like a very, very great core of the team. You have core JJ saved for another 3 years, I believe. So you can now like breathe, right? He doesn't have to do much this year to ensure that next year he still has a very, very great team. Whereas if TSM goes really horribly wrong, they have a much, much bigger cost of changing roster, where Steve can just say, you know what, I have a great roster, I have the great core pieces, they are costing me that much money, but next year I can probably import another player if I feel that I need to upgrade more. And depending on how they do this year, I would assume that based on how they perform at Worlds and where they place, that Steve gets a bit more budget from his bosses to spend even more money next year, right? So when I look at these rosters, I always look, okay, what can you accomplish this year? And not only this year, but how is it going to look in like 2 or 3 years? It's really important to look very forward to like the next years. Whereas fans most of the time always say, okay, this is the roster we have this year. Now you're going to put yourself in a position where you have to carefully craft these rosters together and then look at 2 or 3 years already when you put it down. So I think he's probably in by far the best position than any other North American team. And there's a lot less downside to it, I would assume that, yeah. And then Alfari is a young player. He's going to probably stay there for like 3 years. He's going to sit out his contract. Jensen is re-signed. And to me, it's the best team, at least right now in North America. We will see how how C9 develops, but yeah, I think Steve has put together the best roster of anyone probably.
What do you think, Rich?
So my big question mark about this team, to me, actually, it's not really that much of a question mark. Unfortunately, I think this team is fairly hard capped by jungle. I think that first of all, and I don't say this to be nice, whatever, but Thorin is like a super nice guy, and the reason why I say that is because he's very amicable. He's so easy to work with. It's guaranteed he's going to get along with his teammates, and everyone on the team is going to love him. But that in itself can be a problem because obviously, you know, when tough decisions need to be made or things need to be changed or whatever. You know, I know that one of them, when during the off season, Jensen was trying to shop himself with Thorin for like a long time. They wanted to play together, and I do wonder how much of that is based on what I could imagine is a really great friendship versus how much sense does this actually make. I've worked with Thorin closely. I really like the guy. I find him in game to be incredibly hesitant, incredibly passive. And right now in this meta, it's not too bad actually, because it's very farming based still for the jungler, so you can kind of just chill and farm in your jungle for 10 minutes and not have to do too much. So for this specific meta, maybe it makes sense. I do worry when the meta starts to shift and things start to turn, and he's you know, there's going to be more emphasis on maybe early ganking and being aggressive, that he's going to cap this team. And the reason why I have issue with this move in the context of this roster is because, again, if you go out and spend the money that they spent on Alfari, which I think, you know, in a vacuum, great signing, obviously, to me, it doesn't make sense to go with Thorin. On paper, obviously, there's much more elements to it. I'd have loved to have seen Dardok back on Team Liquid, because I think then you've got Jensen, who is one of the most skilled mid laners in the region for sure. Alfari, who in my opinion is the best Western top laner. And when I say Western, I mean playing in the West as well. So I include Someday in that discussion also. I think he's just the best top laner. And you've Core JJ, who is top 3 Western support for sure. And Tactical, who I don't have as much faith in, but he's fine, right? I think if you had a top tier jungler here, someone like a Selfmade, who obviously I'm not saying they could or would have signed, but just someone who, as the meta goes along, is going to be able to make early plays when needed more reliably. I'd have liked to have seen someone fit in there who could have done that, because honestly, as much as I like the guy, I don't have much faith in Thorin, and I think Thorin basically took advantage last year of a very weak jungle pool in North America. So yeah, I actually prefer Cloud9. just because I think obviously jungle's a very important position as well. And if we do see that shift at all, I think Blabber's going to be someone who I would much rather have on my team trying to make plays in the mid lane with a perks than as good as Jensen is, having Thorin being his partner in crime for that. I just prefer that situation. Obviously, someone like Alfari, I assume is going to be massively outperforming someone like Fudge, if I had to guess. But top lane's just a far less important role right now. So it really doesn't matter as much to me as the sort of mid-jungle position. So for me, actually, I prefer Cloud9 right now. And I also think there's a bit of an ADC gap there as well, even though I obviously prefer Core JJ over Vulcan.
Do you have any thoughts on Thorin, Dexter?
I think he was just the only choice that made sense. I mean, yeah, you could have made the argument for Dardog, but based on history, I don't think that was truly like a viable option for someone like Steve. So you couldn't import another jungler. So I think he was the only one that made sense right from the get-go. So even if you would have liked to have a stronger jungler, I think you probably have to wait another year to get a truly like elite jungler that outperforms. So I personally don't have a problem with him being in that roster, because I think just on paper it was the best choice they could have gotten, I think, in my eyes at least.
So I have two short points to make on this. One is that one is born out of complete ignorance, because I have no idea what like the academy pool of junglers is or whatever. But regardless of who I signed for jungler, and with these kind of players, I probably would look to sign an experienced jungler. So I guess if you're picking between Thorin and a rookie or something, then I would have Thorin starting. I would make sure, however, that when I'm putting the level of investment I'm putting into this roster, that I'm signing a really promising young jungler who may not be, completely ready to take on the world right now, but to play behind Thorin. I think there's been a big mistake made if their academy jungler is not someone that they believe can be good, because then you're essentially telling me that Thorin's going to be your jungler come wind or rain this season, and I don't like that at all. Also, I don't know what the messaging was around this roster. If, Steve came out and said, we're really going to make a push for the world title or not. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was much more sort of reserved. But if there were any aspirations to do well internationally, to me, you go with Dardog. Like, I'm not, again, he's got a whole baggage worth of problems, right? But no one can convince me that this Team Liquid lineup's going to do anything with that jungler. I'm sorry. Like, unless the meta just stays completely where it is and he's able to just power farm, and play like Ivan and these kind of picks, it's like super late every game. I just don't believe that this lineup can do anything internationally, because I think jungle is a position where the West does get really exposed against the East if you don't have one of those S-tier players.
Yes, that's the problem to me, is basically, I agree with your premise basically, which is especially like the last split that he played, it just meant he got overvalued because people were like, he's the best jungler. Now, in the context of that split, he was among them, certainly. Like, Closer was on a fucking bad team. Who else? Svenskaren's EG team just fell apart. What else do we have? Who else do we even have? Obviously, Blabber had his issues in Cloud. Like, yeah, everyone else sort of disqualified themselves by different factors that had nothing to do with play, or just was only them playing badly. So, in my opinion, Thorin's a player where, for the LCS, he can certainly have a long career. He can at least be an average jungler. At his best, he's only going to be above average, though. I agree. I don't think he can be an S-tier player. So, for example, God forbid you get to Worlds, and it was the kind of meta it was this last Worlds, where like the junglers were the fucking like MVPs. It became over. Like, you aren't going to win against some like Canyon level motherfucker with someone like Thorin. Sorry. With that said, though, I definitely think you're onto something with the Jensen angle. Because when I looked at this team and the way it's made, this looks like Jensen. It's just like, it's his fucking birthday party now. He's the 14-year-old girl who gets everything his way. He's like, right, so I've got Alfari, guy's pretty quiet and just super self-sufficient top lane. Cool. Jungler doesn't need to go there. Fucking guys, AD carry's still borderline rookie. Cool. And he'll be kept in line by the Korean. You know what? Why don't I get myself a new fucking butler? Right, Thorin. See, now you played for PoE, mate. Do it like that for me. Do everything I want. Play Marlin 24/7. Like, I can understand selfishly, if I'm the mid lane, of course I ask for that. I actually think that's an area where teams, maybe this will be a good side tangent. One of the areas that kills me is, even though, contrasted to my native game of CSGO, the actual amount of power that players have isn't actually as big. Like, in CSGO, you can just wreck the whole lineup if you're the star player or the veteran. You can choose who joins, who doesn't. Like, you can sort of block a lot of like business moves, because even when actually the business has you under like your balls in a vice because they've got a contract, it's not a bit, unfortunately, like the PR can be so bad if your fans get turned against you by those same players, that generally a lot of the players do get a massive amount of say in who joins, who leaves, etc. But in League of Legends, normally that isn't the case too much. It's like a bit like that. But this looks to me like potentially someone's overstepped their bounds. Because what I want is, listen, obviously I want my mid laner to some degree to have self-interest and to be like, well, I want the player to play for me. The problem is, though, that should then be naturally counteracted by a GM who has a strong position, other players who have their own thoughts. And the idea is, if we're all acting in self-interest, it should like even out in some fucked up sort of like, that's almost like some sort of ANCAP logic of like, you know, how like libertarian society would work. But as a premise, this team to me looks a little bit too much like Jensen or Bust, you know, which, listen, he's a very good player. Maybe he can do it, but it's a bit tough. Like, because I also agree on the Alfari angle. It's like, if I'm getting Alfari, don't I want... Listen, I've just got the 2 best solo laners. Don't I want some jungler who's just going to make these guys just blow off the entire map? That's not really Santorin's game for me.
Yeah, I think that this is an area where you can actually balance the team with the pieces you have versus like a TSM situation where there's nothing that meshes or makes any sense at all. You can actually have, for example, Core JJ with a not especially great AD carry if you have a really good jungler. In this team, it works because Alfari's applying so much pressure in the top lane, you would assume. Jensen's always going to be applying a decent amount of pressure in most matchups in the mid lane. So it gives the bot lane so much more breathing space. You don't need a star AD carry in this situation. So you're creating a much more space for Core JJ to roam and make plays. And you're also giving the enemy like so many problems when they have to worry about Alfari maybe getting jungle help or just pushing on his own, so detracting attention from our jungler, or the jungler playing towards Jensen, right, who's one of the best mid laners in the region, if not the best mid laner in the region. So I think having a good jungler here would have been, even like a raw playmaking jungler, even if he wasn't some great all-round player, and I guess this is why I kind of think to Dardoch as like the only obvious guy right now, right? If I just have like a really good aggressive mechanical player who might not have it all figured out, maybe he's not the best decision maker come late game around barons and blah blah blah, I really don't feel that badly about that situation as long as he's able to play aggressively around either my mid lane or my top laner or both, right? And then the bot lane is going to be so much more self-sufficient where I've got 2 lanes which are generally going to be shoving. So for me, Santorin, who I imagine is going to be spending the vast majority of his time in his jungle, and also you have to take into account player tendencies as well, right? It's not just about what you're doing or not doing. Fog of War's a thing, and you're going to play towards players' tendencies. If you have Jensen in the mid lane, Alfari in the top lane, and a Dardoch-like character running around the jungle, you're going to be so much more apprehensive about making plays.
Sure.
If I'm the enemy jungler and I'm playing against Santorin, if it's the first 5 minutes of the game, I feel really good about ganking top because Alfari's pushed it and Santorin not showing up 2 seconds later. I feel so much better about that than I would if Dardoch was there, for example. Again, I'm not saying Dardoch was the answer, but I really hope for Team Liquid's sake.
Stylistically, though, yes, I see what you mean.
Yeah, that they do have like some good mechanical, aggressive player, or just, you know, a really promising young jungler in their academy team, because if they don't, I think this team's very capped.
The one angle, actually, and I think Dexter nailed it earlier, that I get the Santorin moving in terms of like this could be the big upside, is that obviously he is an NA resident, and as we said, like, you know, you can't pick another import for this lineup. But in the world where you have potentially you want to upgrade the AD carry in the future, like this could one day be the team in a year or two that is the all import team. It could be the first one that ever did it, and it could even be good. Like, imagine this sort of a team if you I mean, think about how many good AD carries we have in Europe now. Who, like, we have more than the 3 for the top 3 teams, so inevitably in a year or two one of them is going to be available, if not more people coming through now. So that could be a Kazi, an upset patch. There's a whole bunch of angles. Like, that is sort of whacking, as much as like when you have a team like Team Liquid, you're supposed to win now, but at the same time, in a sense of like, if it goes wrong, my hedge is pretty good. Like, my out is pretty good as well if I don't end up doing this move, as opposed to like the TSM example we said, where if it fails, you sort of just fuck the whole lineup and you have to pretty much start over. Yeah, I also will say this as well, just as a little preview for all the TSM fans out there to really trigger them when they watch this season, because obviously their fucking team's not winning LCS. I'll just tell you right now, listen, I can already, just as like an intellectual exercise, explain why like maybe Jensen was better than Bjergsen, right? But I tell you what, if he stacks a couple more LCS championships combined with the international mismatch like a motherfucker, by the way, I'm going to go straight out. I'll just do a full article. It'll be like, you know, like 4,000 word article. And I'll just basically like, you know, at the end, it'll be like QED. He's better than Bjergsen. At this point in time, Bjergsen will just be sat there like, fuck, I could have played 2 more years. It's like, no, tough for you. You enjoy being a fucking 7th best coach. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm already setting that up for myself. Like, it's going to be my hook to just watch the season, basically. Right, what about this then? Let's go over to Europe now. I know everyone else can be like, well, what about FlyQuest? Who gives a fuck? Make me care. Make me care. I'll care in 10 episodes if they do something. So if we got, and also, by the way, I'll just give this one parting shot to LCS. Everyone's saying, like, I think FlyQuest's roster is really sick. Like, first of all, yeah, in the context that FlyQuest is never, like, the biggest org, they never had the biggest signings. But you know, half the hype came from literally, I'm not even trolling, this is how bad America is now with media. Half the hype for the players, Rich, came from literally the people selling the players to the team. Like, are people really this dense? Like, yeah, it's like y'all are like that fucking meme, like, from like the fucking Arnold show, whatever. Like, what do you mean? Someone would just lie on the internet? Like, yeah, all the time. Like, what are you talking about, you idiot? Like, I don't get the hype for half these losses. So anyway, let's go to Europe. So we'll rewind. We'll go back to the G2 one, obviously, because we have the whole Perks leaving angle, bringing in Reckless. Right, give me your thoughts on this one first, Rich. Like, the Reckless move. Obviously, the Perks one, to some degree, they couldn't really avoid that. That looks like it basically had to happen. What do you think about bringing Reckless as the replacement?
I think it's a good move. I think that I think the only move you could have done that was any better would have been if you could somehow have got Patrick, but I think that was very unlikely. I mean, he was under contract, and yeah,
and Reckless is free.
Yeah, Reckless is a free agent.
That's pretty
right?
good.
From a branding perspective as well, like actually, you know, if I'm the GM of G2 for this offseason at least, and I have the choice between Reckless and Patrick, even though I think Patrick's a better all-around player, I would have gone for Reckless as well, for one main reason, which is Fnatic are finished. As an org in League of Legends, these guys are finished. I don't mean, you know, from tomorrow they're going to be irrelevant and no one's going to have heard of them, whatever.
Just inevitably.
This is the beginning of the end for them.
Yes.
I mean, arguably, Cap's leaving in the manner that he did, and
that was the first domino for sure.
Yeah, and that was, and I remember, I don't want to make this about me, but I remember speaking to Fnatic management at the time when the Cap thing was going on. In my opinion, this was avoidable, or at least a fightable situation. And I was like, if you let this happen, this is the start of this is the beginning of the end, because you're just going to be trending downwards. Like, they basically just let G2 come and take them from behind. Like, it was pathetic how they dealt with that situation, and I was not remotely surprised when they didn't put things in place to seal Reckless up, because it was so obvious to me as well that the closer we were getting to free agency, that the bigger a window you give G2 to make their pitch, to work their magic. I'm not going to specifically, you know, suggest what else they may or may not have done. It doesn't matter. But the closer it gets to that period of time, the more convinced I am he's going to leave. People were talking about the whole way through, like, will he go, won't he go? As soon as it got to the point where now it's free agency, I knew he was gone. It was inevitable, because G2 are just so much better at getting their players in the offseason than Fnatic are. Fnatic are so passive, and to be honest, they're so arrogant as well. They still believe the Fnatic carries this really prestigious clout, and that everyone wants to play for Fnatic, and they sit there and they survey the fucking pool of players like, who do we want, blah, blah, blah. No. You are an org like any other org. You need to make your moves now. You need to make them aggressively. You need to go after who you want, and you need to lock them up ASAP, and not sit back and think, maybe we'll speak to this guy on Monday. No, fuck that. If you don't sign this guy, someone else will. And right now, Fnatic and Fnatic fans have to face reality. G2 are bigger than Fnatic. They are bigger in every sense. They are more successful. They are the more winning team. They are now the bigger reaching team when it comes to every social media metric and fan base. They have fallen behind, and it all started with letting Caps go. And that was a huge domino. I believe that if that had not happened, if they'd fought it, as I know they could have, and he'd stayed, then we wouldn't have the situation we have now, and Fnatic would still be better than G2. But I was not remotely surprised that he went there. And I think for G2, it makes a lot of sense. I think this kills Fnatic. I think Fnatic are done going forward. It will take a few years before they truly bleed out and drop into the pack. They're not going to, fall off a cliff in the sense that, they're SK or something, right? But they're going to not be on G2's level they're already not in the server, but they're also not going to be on their level organizational wise. So I thought it was a very smart move in that they're basically gutting the organization, at least on the League of Legends side. And also you're getting a really good player as well. I think Reckless is very good. I think that I don't sometimes like his play style and feel that he could be more aggressive and less thinking about himself. But I think overall he's still very good, very reliable, and he does perform on occasion on the international stage. And I have no worries about him at all, other than, to be honest, slight reservations about his personality. But I think that there are enough people with solid personalities and mediators in that organization that I worry less about him on G2 than I did on Fnatic. I think he's actually was more, I don't want to use the word toxic because maybe that's taking it too far, but I think he was allowed to be more of a diva on Fnatic and held more power on Fnatic than he will on G2. Rekkles was Fnatic. After Caps left, Rekkles was Fnatic. Rekkles is not G2. G2 is bigger than Rekkles. Fnatic now, sadly, is not bigger than Rekkles. So I think he's actually going to be in a healthier position for him. He's going to have less power than he did. He should concentrate more on playing AD carry. And I think that G2 are going to be really good. I don't actually necessarily think they're going to be the best team in Europe. I think you lose a lot from Perkz leaving, as we talked about, like his intangibles earlier. Even though Rekkles is undoubtedly a better player at playing AD carry champions than Perkz was, I think you lose so much, especially in the skirmishing, by losing Perkz instead of Rekkles, because Perkz was so much the mastermind behind that. And also, because of Rekkles' somewhat passive play style, is this guy going to be instantly green lighting these skirmishes? Because it takes more than one to tango, right? There's the guy who sees the opportunity, but the great thing about G2 is they all pile in. They all instinctively know this is a fight we can win, and they all fully commit to it. Will Rekkles fully commit to those random skirmishes, which are somewhat flippish, right? Like a lot of these situations they flip are 50-50s, but they flip them because they're like, well, if it's a 50-50 and we're all basically the best players in Europe, this is now a 70-30,
yes,
right?
Exactly. It was like the implied extra value.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
So will Rekkles be able to mentally commit to that? Because he's never really played like that before, right? So that's the question, and why I actually think G2 may have gotten slightly weaker, but they really weakened Fnatic, which both as a team and as an organization, and they're still going to be good, right? Like it's still a very good roster. So I like the move. Once you know Perkz leaving, I like the move.
What do you think, Dexter?
Yeah, a lot to unpack here, but
go wherever you want.
For G2, I do think it was by far the best choice. Like, if you had the choice between Rekkles and any other AD carry, you obviously take Rekkles because the added brand value that you get from him is just so enormous, right? And I think they have like a lot of franchise players on their roster right now. They have Jankos, they have Caps, they have Rekkles, right? So in the way, when you know that Perkz is gone, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I don't think they have downgraded. The only problem that I have with G2, or rather question mark, is there's a vacuum in leadership right now. But I do agree that I think I put a lot of trust in Jankos. I think he can step into the role that Perkz had and kind of lead the team, right? And then it really depends on how well Mickey can integrate Rekkles to the rest of the team, just from that perspective. So I do think that in a way, like purely player-wise, if you just take all the outside stuff out of the way and just look at it from the purely like, okay, compare the AD carry position from Perkz to Rekkles, it might actually be like, it's fine. You're not really losing that much. If you lose anything, maybe you even gain something. So I think I really like that. And their ambition is obviously to win Worlds, right? I mean, that's pretty clear that G2 has the ambition to win Worlds. I think it's the only roster move that could have maybe gotten them like to that point where they can do. And now to Fnatic, I think Fnatic is in a lot of trouble just simply because of how they conducted this off season. And if you look at the player contracts that are running out, or when they're actually running out, they're now facing the big problem next year that they have 3 of their best players, I think, Bippo, Selfmade, and Hillesang, all their contracts are running out. So it goes back to my thesis. I think Fnatic is it's not the same situation, but in a similar situation as TSM, where now they are facing reality, basically, that imagine if they would have spent that bit of extra money to convince Caps to stay. Now they wouldn't have been in that situation where they're now, okay, what are they doing now? They have to massively overspend and compete against teams to basically convince those 3 players, if they would want to stay. And it's very, very expensive, right? For me, it tells a lot that Hillesang has only signed a 1-year deal with that. I think that's a pretty big story in my book, that if you couldn't convince that player to stay for like 2 or 3 years, that is a big problem. And like Rich said, I think the music is out. I think Fnatic, I don't know how their financial situation is looking like, but I would assume that now that G2 is in a situation where they have a monopoly on all the best players, right? Everyone wants to join G2. They can handpick their players. And while at the same time, if they ever find themselves in a situation where they have to replace someone, they can make another $2 or $3 million from buyout, right? They are now in a position where they've basically transcended their roster in a league where they have so much demand from the North American side that they can just, who knows who's the next player, right? If Mickey wants to like go to North America, or Jenkos or Wonder, they're gonna ask for like a lot of money, right? So now I think they have a clear monopoly on all the great talent, and not only in League of Legends, right? I think they also have very, very great people in the other roles. So for me, it's just G2 has gotten so much through it, and even if Reckless doesn't work out, you can sell him next year because he is on a 3-year deal now. Fnatic was never in that situation where they wanted to sell him. So, like I said, I think the downside to that, if it doesn't work out the roster, they can sign any of the other available AD carries next year, make that change, and make a fuckload of money on the buyout that Fnatic didn't get. And like I said, if you are Fnatic this year, you have to make sure that everything goes right. You perform very, very well. Otherwise, you have Upset and Niski on like longer term deals, but the rest of the roster, what is happening, right? Carlos comes along and says, okay, if Selfmade performs really well and is an elite jungler, and maybe Jenkos wants to do a different direction, I know I've been working with him for like 5 years, that he's obviously thinking about what's next, and maybe it's this year that he's gonna decide, hey, I want to try something else. Then you can just sign Selfmade for free again. So Caps, Reckless, and Selfmade. If that actually happens, I don't really think that you can make a strong argument that it's going really well for them. I do think they are not going to be significantly worse off like this year, but I don't really know how 2022 is going to look like for Fnatic. It might be a completely different team depending on their financial situation. They now have to compete against players that are very, very desirable on the market, that might even have big offers from North America. So convincing those players to stay is going to take a lot, and it might get very, very expensive. And then I don't really know who are the replacements, right? What can you realistically do to replace some of these players? We obviously don't know. Europe has a lot of great talent. Like, we might find the solution somewhere in the academy leagues, right? And I was actually very surprised. Like, historically, Fnatic was always the team that has banked on rookie mid laners and has like, developed the talent, right? Whereas now they actually went the opposite and said, okay, we actually sign Niski, who is like proven talent, and as a backup we kind of signed Febvin, right? So if Niski doesn't work out, they've still made the insurance that, okay, we can maybe sub in Febvin. He has been with the team, he knows how it works. I think he's still
that was their best signing, to be honest. Signing Febvin as their backup was their best signing.
I do think it was a great signing, because now you're giving you a bit of a cushion, but at the same time, you buy out a player from North America. Again, I don't know what the finances of that deal. I would have assumed it wasn't really that cheap. So if you buy out a player and you have to replace him, it's going to cost a lot of money again. And yeah, next year, I mean, this year is very, very important. And I fear, like, if I would be the GM of this team, I have no idea how I would convince these 3 players now to sign a deal this year and basically not allow them to go to free agency. Because if I'm a player, I'm going to sit it out. I'm just going to wait until the 17th of November.
For sure.
And then I'm just going to sit it out. Whereas in G2, you know, all the players are on 3-year contracts. And Carlos has put himself in the position now where he is just, like I said, he has the monopoly on talent in Europe. If he ever needs to raise money, he doesn't have to do it anymore. He can just sell a player, right? Caps is probably going to be even more expensive if he ever decides to find. So yeah, he is in a position now wherever there's a free agent that is potentially a side grade, he just financially, if I'm looking at it, I would just sell the player, sign him on for free, make a lot of money in the process, and then can refinance. So I mean, just based on what I think these players cost, I mean, I don't think Fnatic can compete against G2 financially in any way right now, at least until they make they raise a significant round. And I'm not convinced that this is just purely from a financial and business standpoint. Fnatic is in a lot of trouble based on the next 2 or 3 years, how it's going to look like. And you have other organizations that have greatly stepped up their scouting and how they have handled the league, right? You have Rogue, I think you can make an argument for them. They've made a decent amount of effort of getting a strong roster. They're on their heels. Mad Lions, I don't know how that roster is going to perform this year. You still have like Misfits.
Vitality financially.
Yes.
Vitality is by far,
They're poised the next couple of years, it feels like.
Yeah.
Vitality is outside of League of Legends, they have incredible talent. So for me right now, they have a lot of pressure to make sure that next year, maybe they probably tried this year, but next year when a lot of pieces are free again, I assume they're gonna go very, very hard on assembling themselves a top 3 roster again. So now all of a sudden you have to compete against these teams. You compete against Misfits and overactive media with North American capital, right? Capital is not
Mad Lions is
Mad Lions, yeah.
Yeah.
Capital from North America is not the same as Europe, right? So Fnatic is facing these issues moving forward, in my eyes, that are incredibly difficult to solve. And I would not want to be a GM of that team because you are being put in a very, very tough situation where, it might actually be the beginning of the end with Caps. And now Reckless leaving. If actually the other 2 or 3 players are actually leaving after this year as well, then I don't know how you can justify it to your fans. I think it's a very, very tough sell in my eyes. But let's see how this year goes. I mean, they might not even be maybe the other teams are stepping up massively and they might not find themselves in the same position than they were this year, right? So coaching stuff-wise, I don't know what impact these two are going to make, Tolkien and Yamato, to just briefly touch on that. So I think Upset has a lot to prove that he is ready to step into the footsteps of Reckless, because he was a franchise player. He was a great player. I thought he performed really well at Worlds. So really big changes for Fnatic are coming probably in the next couple of years down the line. And like I said, once you're dropping out of that top 6 or top 5 or something, it becomes incredibly expensive to re-sign talent. And Vitality is finding themselves in that situation now. They probably have to spend massively, overspend to convince players to join their team. But
since we're obviously doing G2 and Fnatic at the same time, because I guess they are so intertwined in terms of the off-season basically defined their fate. The funny thing is, if this was just a normal year, I would actually say what I say on all my shows, which is just like I said in the intro, I actually think the fact that Fnatic was performing anywhere close to the level G2 was the last few years is actually incredible work on their part. Whoever has been doing the scouting over there, because it isn't the same people, by the way, it's like a rotating cast of GMs. They're doing a good job. They get the players eventually, and if they make a misstep, the next year they're right back with a good player. The problem is, that isn't League of Legends anymore. League of Legends now, it's like the Premier League. You're going to have the checkbook. They're not joining Fnatic. TSM's found this. People aren't joining just because you're that team. So I definitely agree with the whole attitude angle there. But let's just go first on this side. First things first, I'll say this, which is the whole angle during this off-season with, should Perks join Fnatic, is actually one of the most embarrassing, displays of stupidity I've ever seen from a fan base, and that's the fucking clown car that is the Fnatic fan base. Because think about the context of what we now know, right? First of all, and by the way, Perks is absolutely welcome to come out privately or publicly and dispute this. Carlos said that when he signs players like that, he tells them as he's signing them, by the way, one thing I will never do is sell you to Fnatic. The other thing is I'll sell you before I let you go on free contract because I want to get my value from you. If going in, you know that you're all going to said, by the way, I'm not selling you to Fnatic. At this point in time, you're the douchebag if you insist you have to go to Fnatic. Does your word not mean anything when you do deals with people? By the way, whether a contract or a verbal contract, if I give someone my word, that's my word. I can get away. I can't be sued for it necessarily. It'd be hard to prove, but won't be much of a man if I don't just stand up to my own word. Secondly, the idea that because the whole pivot that they've attempted to use, the lever that the idiot Fnatic fans thought was the secret to the move working, was that they believe Perks wanted to go to Fnatic. Now, certainly, Perks has alluded to the case that, yes, he would have liked to, maybe go and try and Fnatic and all the rest of it. The problem with that logic is, it ain't his fucking choice. He signed the contract. Remember, it was last year, literally that year. He could have waited like Reckless, gone into free agency, either signed to a G2 for more money or gone wherever the fuck he wanted for whatever reasons. That would have been his choice. Instead, the moment he signed that contract, he gave that choice to Carlos, and Carlos chose not to give him to his rival, except it doesn't end there, because the last part is the one that kills me. It's another example, again, of how, unfortunately, the way media, drip feeds out means that, all the information eventually actually comes out, but the majority of people don't actually know it. They only know the big initial pieces they heard of, or they just ignore it if it's not big reporting, right? So the part that seems to have really been missed was those morons, and this will tie into my little rant I'm going to go on in a minute about the Fnatic org, the fucking brain trust they have over there in terms of like Sam Matthews and that other guy, did that stream before the deal was done, where they had the gall to be like, and you know, it's not even that he was allowed to talk to us, by the way, none of your business. You have no obligation for him to be allowed to talk to you under any circumstance. That's even the way the fucking rules work. And you're the fucking idiot staring to complain about poaching. Shut the fuck up, you idiot. You're the ones who wanted to enforce those rules when it was your player leaving. Even though the irony is your player didn't even get poached because he was actually a fucking free agent. It's just you claim obviously you spoke to him during the season. This is the part that blows my mind. Is think about it, right? On that stream, they say, and it's not even true that we couldn't have had the money. Then, like in the next breath, they're like, but actually the amounts that you're hearing about from Cloud9 are incredibly high. Like, oh, give me a break. Like, so what you want is, right, Carlos to give you his most iconic player, potentially still in his prime, with all the intangibles any Western player ever had, for a fucking discount of millions. And what? Because people who are, as far as I can tell, think anime replaces an education, want him to be on Fnatic. Like, that ain't a really good fucking equation at the end of the day. Like, that's garbage. What I love about this off-season, dude, the way this is scripted, you'd almost think I actually was the one, like the fucking one, like writing the simulation code or something. Because the idea that simultaneously they think they can bully fucking, like, Carlos into giving them perks, and then they believe the Fnatic org that they're getting fucking, like, that, well, we're obviously keeping Reckless, right? And then Reckless apparently even did do, like, what I've just said Perks should never do, which is go back on his word. He told Fnatic, yeah, I'm probably going to sign, and then basically just said, like, nah, fuck it, actually, I'm going. And so the best thing is, Carlos even got him for again. Dude, he's taken your two best players as free agents. He's not even paying a transfer fee, you fucking clowns. Like, by the way, if people don't know, here's why Fnatic is terrible at business. Because when they sign your player on a free fucking transfer, they can even take the money that would have been the transfer fee and just toss it at the player for the salary. I even said this, I'm surprised people don't do it. At this point, if I'm like a team like a G2, I'd just fucking give motherfuckers signing bonuses if they're on free transfer. Tell them, you know what, here's the base deal. I give you, you know what, I'll wire you 100k tomorrow if you sign. Like, mate, they could do this. Like, G2, I know they have more resources, so they should be winning in this sense. But basically, Fnatic took all their strengths and didn't capitalise on them. They've been outgamed so hard. It's fucking insane. Like, I don't think I've ever seen anyone lose an off-season harder relative to what could have been the... Remember, in their world, they were going to have Perks and Reckless, and then they'd be the, like, dominant force. Like, this is mental how much they got outplayed. Looks like you want to say something, Rich. Jump in.
Oh, no, yeah. No, I was just going to say a couple of points. First of all, I think that... I actually think that Fnatic have been fairly, I don't want to say lucky necessarily. I mean, they had Young Buck for a while, right? Which yes. I think covered a lot of the cracks that were happening in terms of the management decisions and so forth that were going on in the background. For anyone who doesn't know, and there's no reason why a random fan should or whatever, but it was very fraught behind the scenes in Fnatic for a long time. Like, very tense between management, like, one thing I would say that Fnatic was, I guess you could say they were kind of good at, is they made it look like sunshine and rainbows from an outside perspective when the entire building was on fire, basically for the entirety of like the last 5 years. Fnatic is not a comfortable place to be. I'm not going to say it's a bad place to be because I think there are many things career-wise being in Fnatic, you know, over the last few years could have done for you, right? But it is not a stress-free... you know, particularly happy place to be. It's very tense, typically, at Fnatic. I think one of the biggest mistakes they've made is that Sam Matthews still has seemingly majority of control there. Yes. This guy is a categorical moron who knows nothing about esports or business on any level. This guy parades around doing various different shows and always volunteering to go as part of a panel, whatever. If you ever hear this guy open his mouth for an extended period of time and you know anything about the context of which he's trying to talk towards, it's very clear he doesn't know anything about... He's
basically a mimbo, if people know that term. Like, he's just like a fucking good-looking guy. That's it. He's ridiculous. Exactly. He's actually ludicrous guy, I know.
I mean...
It's all smoke and mirrors.
For the few people who are in attendance, he did a really funny talk a couple of years ago, which I unfortunately don't think anyone recorded, but when he was basically talking about women in esports and why they can never be successful. But if anyone does have a recording of that, then
hit me up.
Yeah, because I'd love to see that again. But
fucking hell.
Yeah, this guy, and he doesn't know anything about the players which he's, you know, green lighting to be signed or anything either. So there's no sort of overview figure that has any modicum of control in Fnatic that's basically doing quality control, right? And that's a big problem. I don't so much blame the people underneath him, because I think it's a very difficult job when you don't have any clear direction. This guy basically comes in and out at his leisure whenever he feels like it's going to be a good PR spot for him, or wherever he thinks, if things are really on fire, then he can come in and do some crappy stream where he gives ludicrous justifications and basically tries to play the victim. And basically something really disingenuous that Fnatic did this offseason as well is they knowingly, dishonestly bought in and sided with the Reddit narrative of, if a player wants to leave, he should be allowed to go where he wants to go because we like players. And that's what this is nonsense. Like, simultaneously, the Reddit community, I think, or the fan base in general, are getting gradually more educated about the myth of the business of esports and, how teams aren't really making money and stuff like this, but simultaneously are not willing to let go of the idea that players should be allowed to swan around and do whatever they want. Like, you can't have it both ways. But esports teams are real businesses that need to not necessarily make money in the immediate future, but they need a logical path that at least makes sense on some level. They need to be financially sound and make sound decisions. And that does not include letting players do whatever the fuck they want, whenever the fuck they want to do it. And this whole thing around perks is absolutely ludicrous. And I think now Fnatic is in a position where they're basically a year-to-year org, in all honesty, particularly when it comes to League of Legends. Their financials aren't great, just in general as a whole. Their holding club, Sampa, has huge debts. They haven't had many successful, hugely successful, lucrative rounds of investment over the last couple of years. They're living basically year to year. They have huge contracts, which they're actually in a really weird position where, someone like Whippo, who obviously they would see as like a valuable asset, right? So in theory, in a playing sense, they want to keep him. But now they have this horrible situation where it's like, we really want to keep this player, but also, can we afford him beyond next year?
It's a bit the same problem we had with Soaz, basically. Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly.
Eventually, there's a reason why people leave. It isn't just like, by the way, towards a better team. So also you get paid. You want to get all the money.
So they're now in this horrible situation where their absolute best players, who I would say, Hillesang and Selfmade, are going to be out of contract. Whippo's going to be out of contract as well. Obviously, he's important for them right now, and especially the context of the guys that are coming in. And then you make a decision like buying out Niski for presumably a pretty significant amount of money. Absolutely bizarre. If that was even a low six-figure buyout, that is ludicrous, especially considering that later on you bought Febiven, or got Febiven on a free, who is, in my opinion, actually just better than Niski, to be honest. And I would guess at some point during this season that Febiven will actually play games and start for Fnatic, if I had to guess. And then you bring in a guy like Upset, who I also think was a horrendous decision. Not because I dislike Upset or that he's, a bad player. I personally do think he's monstrously overrated, and I also think that he has a very cancerous personality. And that's the main reason why I would never bring him into an organization like Fnatic, because Fnatic behind the scenes is a complete mess where you've had a history of divas running the asylum and disconnect between management. And now you're bringing in someone who has the biggest ego in the scene. And one good thing about losing Reckless, I guess that you could say, is you're alleviating yourself somewhat of a diva personality, right? Reckless's diva personality was nowhere near as bad as Upset's. So you're downgrading in terms of the literal player ability, and you're upgrading, as it were, in terms of the amount of a diva that the guy you've signed at that position is. So have fun, Hillesang. It's going to be another rough year, buddy. Sorry about that. But yeah, I just think it's a complete mess. And I think there's every chance. I mean, let's just play this out, right? Let's fast forward to a year from now. Let's say Whippo decides to do whatever it is that he wants to do. Selfmade leaves as well, and so does Hillesang. What is your org now? Like, what is your org? You've got Upset, who, and keep in mind as well the context of AD carry in Europe, right? Because that's very relevant. AD carry is the most stacked position in Europe by a mile. So even if you are someone who rates Upset as a player more highly than I do, he's still not the best. It's not like you have, and even if he was, it would be by like an absolute fingernail, right? So you don't have someone who can reliably outpower other players in that position. You've got Kazi, you've got Patrick, you've got, basically every AD carry. I mean, it speaks to the strength that Cobby is arguably like the worst AD carry in the league right now, possibly.
Just maybe.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's decent, right? Crownshot doesn't have a job, and Crownshot was popping last split. So, yeah, I think Fnatic's in a horrible position. I think they allocated funds very strangely, and yeah, I would not be surprised if they sort of fell off the map after this year. But I mean, maybe they will, maybe they won't. But right now, I think what is clear is they're basically a year-to-year org right now, at least in League of Legends.
Probably the stupidest thing, in my opinion, was the way they handled the whole Reckless situation. Because the other thing is this. I know not much of this will ever come out in public unless, like, 5 years down the line, I can make, like, the documentary I've always been threatening I'll make if the people agree to sign on the line. Which is, basically, as far as I know, even sometimes from Fnatic players, I'll say, Reckless a bunch of times basically pulled, like, it's him or me type ultimatums. And there's a reason why. Caps. Young Buck.
Yeah.
I mean, the only one that was good was maybe if he's the one that got rid of Brock, so fair play, Records. I'll give you points for that one. Well done, mate. But like, if the idea that you're going to let people like Caps, Young Buck go, like, mate, you'll never have people as good as this in your org ever again. Never again. Not in the history of esports. Unless something incredible happens with the investment or someone like some like fucking billionaire buys the team. It ain't happening. Like, so the idea you do all that for this guy. The results are even there, where by his logic, if he really believed in the teams and the players that they're bringing in, then he should be like, right, we're just one move away, right? You know, we're not far from getting to where we want to be. And then he leaves as well. Then it was all for naught, wasn't it? You never got any championships out of it. The best you had was like some top 8s at Worlds and some second places. Like, was that worth tossing aside the best mid laner maybe ever to play in the West? A coach that has like ludicrous intangibles, maybe isn't the best X's and O's coach. We've also found if you have good enough talent in Europe, it ain't about fucking coaching with X's and O's anyway. Like, Grabs isn't doing that. So to me, they've so misplayed their hand on that one. On the Reckless side of things, first of all, this is like fucking the richest cream in the world for me. I can barely eat enough of it because he's just a disloyal little bitch. Like, he literally has been proven to be that. It's unreal. And on top of that, he doesn't believe in any of his teammates. All those people he's played with, it was nonsense because guess what? He was one of the problems the last few years. I will say it's crazy because one thing I'll give him positive for is he played pretty fucking good during the time that they had all these problems. Somehow it didn't affect his game, which I'll say props. And also on the whole angle, if we look at him in G2 now, I actually agree in the sense that it's going to this is going to drastically change the playing style of the team. Everything you loved about the way G2 played the last 2 years, that's gone. Like, now they're just essentially like a traditional European League of Legends team. They've got the 2 mega solo laners who I think will be fucking side laning every time it's possible. And Reckless is just going to be the AD carry who stays in lane and joins the team fight. Like, he isn't going to be doing any of the shit like you said, Rich. Like, he's not going to be going into mad IG like 24/7 skirmishes. That isn't Reckless's game. And I know anytime you dare say the word passive, every moron Reckless fan comes out. But he's not. It's like we're talking about it's a tendency, or in his case, definitely is a philosophy. He is not the guy who's like Jaculate. He's not going to put himself in harm's way to like hard carry a fight. I always thought, actually, I think you made a great point. I'll tie into that. My opinion, one of the reasons I never quite rated Reckless's game as high as all his fans do is exactly because if I actually look in isolation selfishly and say, right, to both have a chance to do damage, but also to definitely stay alive and I won't die and I won't be the worst guy who lost the game, he plays the game exactly as you'd want, right? He plays like if you had a computer tell you what the theoretical odds are. The problem is, what you described there is actually perfect, because the great players, I know this from Quake, where people take fights that don't make sense, you know, but they're the better player. The great player knows the odds aren't the same for me. I can essentially break the matrix. Like, I can take the 40-60 fight and make it a 50-50. So the whole point is I can opt into these ones. And in my opinion, that's what G2 was the best at. Like, they were unreal at knowing how to come back to... Reckless ain't going to do any of that shit. So in my opinion, you're back to a normal sort of meta of the game. That's not surprising, by the way. I don't think any team ever has played the way G2 has. I think, like, for example, the IG that won Worlds was like a worse version of that, in my opinion. They just had certain players that were better. They just brute forced it. So I think that they can still be the best team because there is no G2 to compete against them. That's all fine. They can still be a great team. Maybe it all works out awesome. So I get the move. I like the move in that sense. I do think, though, that, like, on the Fnatic side, I wanted to just get onto this part, and we'll maybe make this a big topic, and then we'll see if we'll wrap the show after that. On the Fnatic side, I'll touch on what you said there, right? It's the attitude that is mental. Because I gave them all those props a minute ago, right? I said, yeah, they've done a great job scouting. Also, when I made that video where I said they don't sign top talent, sadly, a point I didn't really make in it, because fans they never think of these packs themselves. You have to, like, present the points, and then they pick among the points which they think is correct, because they don't think for themselves. They're just a menu of what opinion they're going to copy from you, right? The problem is this. Yes, of course, they've had players come to the team that were top players. They never fucking bought them. There was no $1 million buyouts. You know, like, it's not like Soaz came because they bought him for $2 million from Origin or something, is it? Like, he just came when he was available. Like, that's the problem. Fnatic relied, and you can't rely on this in the modern day, on being the geniuses of getting all the top talent rookies and all the players who were up and coming and getting the first 2 years super productive, and then you have to redo it. Well, the problem with that is, as TSM's found out, the reason you used to get those players, you were also playing, coaching and scouting on easy mode. They already wanted to join Fnatic. You already had at the time the highest salaries, or you'd be up there. Like, you had every factor, and you had your Expects, Soazes, and you fucking reigning champions. Every factor as to why a young player would want to join exists. 0 of those factors exist now. I'm not joining this team to play with Selfmade, even though he's the best jungler, because he's still in his fucking, like, he's starting his 3rd year now, guys. He isn't a legend. He's not Reckless. He's not Soaz. He's not Expected back in the day. Like, that's the problem. There's no pull of the superstars. You can't pay me the most. In fact, now it's getting... Actually, without revealing numbers, it's getting embarrassing now. Like, now I'd bet like half the league could pay as much or more and do my buyout as well. And then thirdly, and this is the killer, you had the pick of the litter before. To be a genius picking among rookies, basically the genius is that you dare take a rookie. That's the genius, that you'll dare take a Febiven. Right? When everyone's scouting the rookies, mate, they're not even coming to your team anymore. Like, they're going to the other teams now. And you might have had the best scouting when nobody scouted. The other teams just get motherfuckers who like have all the deep connections and all the ARLs. Like, there's a reason why some of those teams, like the idea that Mad Lions and Rogue in the server are competing at the level of Fnatic and this year might exceed them. You have fucked up your org massively if that happens. I know some of them might have good money, but that you should have had all these intangibles that made you the best still. So the idea that, like, put it this way, here's the thought exercise I want fans to do. Because to me, the Niski signing is mega underwhelming. Like, I don't hate the idea he comes as a player, but I better have some gods in the other fucking positions if he's coming. Mid lane in Europe is what the fucking game is about. It's why everyone always never understood that genius way I had of criticising Nemesis. Where even though I will criticise him and think he's like an arsehole as a person, a bit overrated as a player, I just phrased it in the most genius way of it. Because what I did is I said a statement which everyone would agree with, but still triggers idiots. Where I said that statement, which is that, like, if you look through all the players that have won LEC, the worst mid laner arguably was Febiven because he was a rookie. And if it's Febiven, fucking hell, it's hard to win LEC. So the idea that, like, Nemesis or now Niski is winning LEC, child, please. If he does, then he goes straight on that fucking list as the worst now, doesn't he? So, like, the odds, the idea that that's the position we're gambling on someone who's not a proven, like, S-tier player is mental to me. So I think if you look at this lineup, right, bearing in mind Selfmade is only, like, he's only had the one godlike year and he was pretty good as a rookie, right? He's not even he's a guarantee that he's going to be god tier, but yeah, I'd put my money on it. You take Selfmade off this team. Try this thought exercise with any other team. Take Selfmade off this team and put anyone except Jankos as the jungler, and this shouldn't even be a Fnatic roster. This is like a roster of like a mid-table team, and nobody would be hyped about it. I know, again, because Fnatic fans are the TSM fans of Europe, I know they're all going to find a way to get hyped, and they're all going to believe it's all going to work out. Like, it ain't. Like, the actual best case scenario, I think, is what you described. It's that it sort of goes to shit the first half of the split, and then Febiven just comes in, and hopefully that mix works. I mean, he's a strong player, and then you just turn it around from there. Even then, I don't know how you win in LEC. Like, I think this whole thing's sad as fuck, because it's like, not only did they fail, but sometimes they failed where they used to be really strong, and they could have actually still had some of those like qualities now, but they're not gonna matter anymore. Like, as we're saying, especially, by the way, as it's been alluded to, if Selfmade leaves to G2 at the end of this year, just fucking kiss the org goodbye. It's a waste of time at this point. Like, that's the last one of your... Like, at this point in time, it's like these motherfuckers have found, like, they found 5 of the golden tickets from Willy Wonka, and then your business plan is to keep finding them every year. It ain't going to happen, is it? Come on.
I mean, I think also should not be underestimated as well is that Fnatic had like a 3-lap lead at when League of Legends became a thing,
yes.
Right? In Europe especially, basically, there was only one really famous organization, or arguably like NIP or something, or like SK and Counter-Strike at the time, right? But in terms of that, we're actively participating in putting any kind of investment into League of Legends. Fnatic was the only esports organization anyone had ever heard of. So they had complete monopoly over the players. It wasn't even a money thing back then, right? It was like they're probably one of the only teams who are even paying players, like, yes. Period. And they would have been paying them most likely either cash in hand or with some shitty IC contract of like legit. Like Xpeke in season 1 was probably getting like 300 euros a month, like 500 euros a month, right? So they had this huge head start just because of the clout and the name that this was basically the only relevant org even participating in League of Legends. And then they were able to ride that wave without having huge increase in cost for literally 4 years, right? Season 5, or to be honest, really season 6, because that's when Immortals came in and really sort of inflated the value. Basically, for at least 4 or 5 years, Fnatic were paying fuck all to run their League of Legends team. Yes, they weren't spending inordinate. They weren't getting inordinate amount of money in from sponsors either, like not crazy money. But they were the most popular organization in Europe. They were selling merch. Yes. They were probably running at like a very comfortable rate, right? As soon as any injection of money came in, they did not use that lead that they had to extend it or to do anything to ensure to make themselves more future-proof. They just started, as you say, like trying to find rookies. Like when the X2k roster left and they went to make Origin, they didn't use any of the advantages that they had to, actually have made any money in the meantime and then go out and spend it and ensure that they had some dominance thereafter. They got incredibly lucky, in my opinion. I mean, if anyone actually knows about the situation surrounding like Huni and Reignover, for example, pure luck, essentially.
That was crazy.
That happened. Febiven, obviously, people forget and say, oh, Febiven, that lineup that Febiven came from at the time, they were basically ruining everyone in scrims at the time, including EU LCS teams without being an EU LCS team themselves, other than Alliance. Basically, everyone else, including Fnatic, Febiven was bodying everyone. Everyone knew about Febiven. He wasn't some like, oh my God, who's this guy? Diamond in the rough. No, this guy was literally a top 3 mid laner in the West when he was playing in Challenger Series. And everyone knew that at the time as well. So that wasn't like some crazy scout. That was, we're Fnatic, we're the biggest org in Europe, and we would like to have your player, please. And the guy was essentially poached, and obviously there were no regulations back then. There was nothing anyone could do. Whatever, he went, and good luck to him, and they had a great year. But they never, so then they got basically through the sheer grace of good fortune, they had that 2015 year, right? So now, theoretically, their lead on everyone is astronomical. So how do you get from that to where we are now, where now on a routinely annual basis, you're allowing your best players to go to a different org who didn't even exist back then? That organization didn't even exist. And it's not even like when Carlos made G2, it was like, hi, I'm Carlos, I've made G2, and I've got this billionaire with me, right? No, at the start, it was Carlos on his own. And yeah, there was some financial backing, but it was basically all predicated on what Carlos had done himself. And it was actually, to be fair, pretty grassroots, right?
Yeah.
And he just comes in from that starting point when Fnatic had the 18-0 split. They'd won already 5 LCS titles at that point. Biggest org in Europe, at least, by a mile. And you've gone from that to becoming this other team's bitch. Like,
basically, imagine
4 years.
If people want to know what the analogy is, like, because as you say, that year, the season 5 year, where obviously in theory they hit one of their highs, sure, the Caps like reckless lineup was good later on, but this was like, yeah, where they locked into another lineup that was like a international quality team. That, like, if you pause the video there and you tell fans in that summer, by the way, you know this Fnatic team that's like looks unbeatable now, and they've done all right. Yeah, in about a couple of years, Gamers 2, oh yeah, that shitty little org that can't even qualify for like out of Challenger. Yeah, they not only like take all their best players and stuff, but like they massively exceed them, because obviously like these next years, by the way, is also where they're going to like erase every one of like Fnatic's records and shit in the past. They're going to complete, and then business, they're going to be way ahead of them, and eventually like it'll go the other way around. That would be like telling me, if I pause history, like, oh, fucking Manchester City's going to be like battling in relegation, but then like fucking some team that's 4th from the bottom is going to be like the dominant team that just takes all the best players and all the international signings every year. Like, in that scenario, listen, you give props to the little team that came up, but how did you fuck up your lead? I agree. It's like you were so far ahead that you let the arrogance of that. You're on some fucking tortoise and the hare level shit. That's how dumb the guys in Fnatic are. Like, I think it's crazy. And by the way, I'll just say this. Here's the narrative for me in LEC. Because I think, like, if G2 don't win with this lineup, like, something seriously has gone wrong. So the new narrative for me, it's going to keep me interested, is it's an MVP race between Wonder and Caps. Because guess what? If you're a big fan of, like, really good top laners, now it's back on the table, because in my opinion, Wonder was the guy who so often would sacrifice for the others and for the comp and everything. In this team, you just take your best champions and you fucking smash those lanes, mate. And these two, like, listen, they already have a really fucking experienced jungler, but these two solo laners should run amok on LEC this split. I can't wait. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I wouldn't sleep on Rogue either. I think Rogue are going to be really good. They had such a huge upgrade in top lane, and I mean, I don't put too much stock in, scrims or anything like that, but I believe Rogue are going to be really strong. I think it's going to be a 2-horse race between Rogue and G2. I think Mad Lions had a garbage off-season, if I'm honest. I think they still have some strong points, but basically they thought, oh, our top laner got bullied by someone in the best of at World, so let's sign that guy instead. And this guy, beyond that, doesn't really have any business being there, in my opinion. I think Elyoya is fine, I guess, but he wasn't even like one of the best challengers.
There wasn't much hype around him, yeah, exactly.
And then Humanoid, to be honest, hasn't really kicked on as you might have liked. I think he had such a promising year because he was a rookie. So you're like, okay, he's kind of flipped at the moment, but once he polishes out, great. But he hasn't polished out at all. He's still the exact same player he was before, who is pretty flip. So you're basically solely reliant on your bot lane, which is admittedly very good. Kazi's a really good player. Kaiser's a really good player. But that, to me, they're battling for third with Fnatic. But I think Rogue might be really good. I think all of the players on that team are going to be as good as they were last year, if not a bit better. I think obviously the Vander situation was a bit strange because Vander seemingly had like a really good year.
Yes.
So that one's a bit strange, but based on what I'm hearing, essentially this guy was just outperforming him whenever he had the opportunity. I guess in houses or whatever, he was just really, really good. So if it's a brave move that turns out well, then they deserve the success that comes from that. If they drop the experienced player for someone who they think has an international ceiling, let's say, and then Otto over Finn is like Ferrari from a Fiat. So I think Rogue might be really good.
What do you think of those two teams, Dexter? We'll make this the last point. What do you think of Mad Lions and Rogue?
Yeah, for me, Mad Lions is I thought they benefited hugely from just being an online environment. So we're probably going to go in an online environment for like the foreseeable future. So once we go back to like an environment where you have an arena, where you have crowd and everything, I think they are the team probably that are going to drop off the most and are going to be at a disadvantage. Whereas with Rogue, you have very experienced players, right? With Odo coming in, I think Kansama is still obviously like a very great AD carry as well. And I think Rogue is going to be very, very strong for sure. I don't know how that's going to like shape up, like how Mad Lions, if they can stay at like top 3 and go to Worlds again, or if another team, I mean, what other teams do you realistically have that are going to be contending, right? We don't really know if Schalke is going to keep up the same momentum that they had. SK probably downgraded. So yeah, it's probably gonna be like a race between like Fnatic, Mad for that spot. Whereas Rogue, I would agree. I think Rogue probably is gonna be like, could be very well the next like contender against G2 and be a top 2 team.
Yeah, the only thing I have with the Rogue signing is like I'm in the same boat as you, Rich. The weird thing for me is this: if you have this same lineup but you just keep Vander. Now, I'd already tell you I'll have them ahead of Fnatic. I'll have them second for sure, and they contend with G2. Because what I don't get about this is another example of like a trend I don't like in League. It's why I made that video about like players who know how to win and have like the experience for the game. It's such an underrated quality. Like maybe this guy's a monster support individually as a support, but is he a captain? Does he have experience? Does he be like, mate? Some of the things that Vander was doing in that Rogue team, like he was the fucking linchpin for me. Like I don't think they even make the playoffs without him in that summer split. He was having some really strong games. And actually, he was one of the few players who didn't look like they fell apart when the team had their issues. So, like, to me, you have so many good players in all the other roles. You keep him as the sort of the veteran, the captain in that sense. And that's how you balance out all the rookies. Because that's the only downside I have here. Maybe like the leadership angle. And then I agree with the Otto Hamner move. I think that's great. I can't believe more teams weren't just going ham for this guy. And then on the Mad Lions one, right, first of all, I'm going to say this right now. So, as Dexter alluded to earlier, Mad Lions, right, is not only the Spikes people, but it's essentially the group behind them is called Overactive Media. And they are a team where if you go and look in the different esports games, they have an Overwatch League team, they have this League of Legends team, and they have a CSGO team called Mad Lions, right? This org does not spend money. They are the fucking bargain basement divers. Now, I'll give them credit. In CSGO, they looked like they'd done a good job. They got this team that was like a tier 2 team, and it briefly looked like it maybe had potential to be good. You know why it didn't end up being really good? They sold the best pieces from it. They're just about to complete losing their equivalent of an Acorn or a Caps type. This guy called Acorn, this guy called Bobsy were equivalent, not quite in terms of where you are, because obviously the games are different, but they were sort of like in terms of promising talents, they were going to be like a Caps and Reckless type people, like people who clearly are going to be the next top players, just maybe in a year from now, They sold those guys and just replaced them with more unknown Danish people. So you can see in CSGO they don't want to spend. In League of Legends, right, this is the problem. When you had that Splice team that was like very limited, I get why you changed players, and some of those veterans did need to go. But then I looked at the rookie team, right? The problem is this. The results, where they were like top of Europe a bunch of times, made fans think, oh, they chose these rookies because they believe these rookies are better than even, LEC top players. Bullshit. They couldn't have bought the top LEC players. What they did was a really good job scouting in the ERL, so props to them for that. The problem is this. They're the mini Fnatic at this point in time, because these moves that they've made in top and this just smacks of arrogance in my opinion. Right? There's only two conditions here, and I want to put this on the table for the people who know more about the game than me, who potentially watch this. Right? If it is the case that you are totally fine with them removing Shadow after 1 year, why the fuck did you all spend the last year talking like he was the next coming of Jesus? You would have thought, like, if I removed the names, you would have thought you were talking about Selfmade the way that they talked about this guy. Even though, as far as I can tell, didn't 80% of his success come from just picking Lee Sin and doing fucking sick kicks? Like, I'm sick and tired of people telling me I know nothing about the macro game of League of Legends while they're mega experts, and then they think that mechanical junglers who pop off are the best junglers. This is the dumbest shit of all time, and if Smithy's career in America didn't teach you that, you will never understand it. You will always think that the solo queue hype is the next best player, because in your brain they do that thing that is insane to me. As someone who's been an org, you must be able to relate to this, right? What they do is they take the super duper skilled rookie and they go, well, if he just figures out all the rest of the game, it's like, what? Dude, that's the other way around. You've got the equation flipped. If I have a guy who's figured the game out, I'll take him having a dip in mechanics. Maybe he can get that back. That's a more reasonable maybe. The idea of the guy who's never been a genius at the game is going to just learn that as well as being... Like, that is a ridiculous equation. Like, that's one of those fucking, like, memes where it's like, you know, step 1, step 2, and then step 3 is the question mark, and then step 4 is like the best jungler ever. Like, you didn't know what the step was. Like, no one does. So the idea that, yeah, in the top lane one, I think it's whack as fuck. I know people are going to go like, but he's super sick hype and, you know, Broken Blade and all these guys. I don't give a fuck, mate. Again, prove it. If you can prove it, fair play, I'll give it. Because I think this Mad Lions team is like borderline playoffs. And I know that might sound harsh, but I think they're going to be like the 6th best team, mate.
Yeah, no, I think that what you said though is like a good analogy for something like Larson and Leader, right? Like, I don't think anyone thinks Larson's like some. You never speak to mid laners and they're like, dude, laning against Larson,
yes.
like I can't breathe. You know, it's so oppressive. It just knows the matchups perfectly off cooldown. Like this guy's just a mechanical. Like, no, this guy is purely, in my opinion, like a cerebral player who just understands the game on like a super deep level. Like even like Froggen, I mean, he's like baby Froggen, right?
He knows his game, yeah.
Yeah, he just knows the game insanely well. Like, neither of them were ever... I mean, they both have good mechanics, of course, but neither were ever, like, the best mechanical player. And then you look at someone like Leader, who is probably as good as Caps mechanically on certain champions, right? But he's just, in the head, maybe needs to work on a few things, right? Which is why certain teams this offseason, you know, obviously there was, on his side as well, he didn't just want to join a bottom feeder, which I understand and respect. Like, he should wait for the perfect opportunity, like, but I think that's what his strength is right now, is that he had the self-awareness to realize he's a flash in the pan right now, but he can be more, but he doesn't want to be remembered as a flash in the pan by joining a bottom feeder team and then going out, right? But that is a perfect, you know, mechanics versus brain right now. And if Leader gets, you know, sorts himself out in that sense, he's going to be one of the most sought after players, sure, but you don't want to just take the plunge on him if you can take the plunge on someone like a Larson, who basically does have the game figured out, right? And he can, you know, he's always going to get better at champions as time goes on anyway. So, yeah, I think that is definitely the right way to have it around. I would admit that, to be honest, I was kind of on the Shadow hype train a bit. But
I was also, as well, mate. He looked amazing,
Yeah, but that I did after a while think, this guy is only playing Lee Sin, but fuck me, his Lee Sin is incredible. But yeah, I think it's very strange. I would defend that decision just slightly, in that if everyone is to believe who was surrounding that situation, who's given me information about this situation, is accurate, then what some of Shadow's behavior was kind of difficult to come back from. I think he basically, I don't want to get into too much detail.
He's a pretty young guy, to be fair.
Yeah, I don't know what was true and what wasn't true, but if any of that is to be believed, then he kind of put himself in a situation where they had to get rid of him, really.
Right. Fair enough.
So, but with who they replaced him with, I thought that was kind of strange. I mean, you know, I know we're like wrapping up now, but if I was Mad Lions, I'd have gone after someone like Dan if I could. You know, when I have a bot lane that's talented, and you know, Humanoid is talented but flawed, having a jungler who's just incredibly smart and has been around the game for like a really long time, like Dan, I would have gone for, rather than El Yoya, who to me is much more of like a wild card. Like, I have no idea what we're going to get from this guy. To me, he wasn't even one of the best performing challenger junglers. So it's very strange, but I understand why they maybe got rid of Shadow.
By the way, I'll totally admit, if you go back and watch the past episodes of any shows I was on last year, I was hyping Shadow as well. But then again, I don't claim to be this fucking savant of all the macro shit. Like, what I can't handle is how many people just front in league like, well, I am the super expert who has the amazing eye test. And then they just go off the fucking results as well. Like, oh, but he carried the game. It's like, well, tell me what he did. Like, there's so few people even attempt that. It's kind of whack. And I have to say as well, like, the reason why I also kind of call out the Mad Lions staff a little bit is because even though, by the way, they're actually some of the most amiable people who come on shows and they'll tell you a lot of stuff, they're not like openly arrogant. I just believe their philosophy was arrogant. Because I think if you look at them, like, just go back and watch my shows. When they were like the #1 team in spring and they'd beaten G2 and then, you know, and they were like top of the league in fucking summer, the way these guys talked, like there was one time where there was a little back and forth where like they disputed when I told them like, well, you can never really know though that your players are going to be that good if we're on LAN in a playoff scenario. They were like disputing it. And it's like, mate, like the analogy is this. This is the reason I personally wouldn't gamble on rookies if I'm a top team. I'll let like the mid-table teams do that gamble. The reason why is you never know what will happen until that guy's in that situation. The analogy would be, obviously it'd be useless for half of the fucking Fnatic fans watching this, but the analogy would be having sex. You could read every fucking book in the world. You could have the person who's the best at sex in the world tell you what to do, what it's going to be like. You could fucking watch every video. It'll never be the same as the moment you're there. In that moment, you might just forget everything. Everything could go wrong or could go right. Like in that scenario, you have to put people through the fire before you actually know if they're legit in that sense. So the idea you were going to take an entire team of rookies, because by the way, I'll say this for the millionth time, Humanoid's a rookie. I don't give a fuck that he's not strictly for the Rookie of the Split award a rookie. A rookie is a fucking colloquial term. He is very young in his career. Basically a whole team of rookies, and what they were all just going to work out. All 5 were going to work out at once and against the best teams in the world. It's just such an implausible principle. So if they'd have been a little bit more like mentally like, if they'd have sort of set their expectations more reasonable, which they did at the beginning of the year, but the problem is the results like let them get carried away. Fair enough. But the problem is I believe that those coaches really did just think that like, you know, if you give the right speech to a rookie, he doesn't choke at Worlds. Like, mate, some of the best players of all time have choked. Like fucking Perks choked for God's sake. Like it's just unreasonable to expect that. So I have to say it is a bit of a sad lineup in terms of Mad Lions because they're not really building on what they did last year, I'm afraid. Like maybe, as you say, maybe the bot lane is the savior. Maybe they're by far the best bot lane and maybe that's a route to the top. I don't see this as like a contender team like they were last year. I think they've missed the window actually.
Yeah, no, I don't really see it happening. I think a lot of these teams are actually lucky in that I think Mad Lions will be a playoff team because most of the other teams
there's some pretty shit lineups, right?
Garbage. Yeah,
yes.
So they should be a free walk for a lot of these teams, but hey. Is what it is. I guess, I mean, pretty soon, we, you know, in a couple of splits time or something, we'll get to see if Riot's true to their word about analyzing organizations who are tanking multiple splits in a row and see if any pressure gets applied. I'm looking at this Astralis lineup and I'm wondering if this constitutes as actually attempting to be competitive.
That almost looks like the most cynical min-max I've ever seen, and I've watched and used to be a part of the SK Gaming organization. This video was kindly supported by Lagger15, Pronogo, Andrew, Dean Tanglis, Animosity, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Hades, Jensen Goh, Zoomba, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Want to ask a question in one of my monthly video AMAs? Do you want teasers? See who's going to be on my next interviews and shows? Maybe you want to take part in a discussion with me where we go anywhere. We had a mad one talk about chess the other month. If so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today at the link in the description box below.